The gunshots echoed through the narrow canyon, sending a flock of startled crows into the pale Colorado sky. Clayton Reeves pressed his back against the stagecoach, Colt revolver gripped tightly in his weathered hand. His heart wasn't racing, not anymore. Not after Gettysburg. Not after the wilderness. Not after Cold Harbor. The familiar weight of the weapon brought no comfort, only resignation. At 43, he'd hoped never to fire it in anger again. "Keep your head down," he shouted to the terrified passengers inside, as another bullet splintered wood inches from his face. The spring of 1885 was supposed to mark a new beginning, not another fight for survival. Two bandits remained concealed among the boulders flanking the road. A third lay motionless in the dust, his blood darkening the thirsty earth. Clayton hadn't wanted to kill him. He never wanted to kill anyone again after the war. But some habits were hard to break when survival hung in the balance. "We just want the strong box, mister," one of the bandits called out. "No need for anyone else to die today." Clayton didn't answer. Instead, he carefully tracked the voice, noting the position. When the man shifted position and exposed his shoulder briefly, Clayton fired. A scream confirmed his aim was true. The sound brought no satisfaction, only memories of other men who had fallen to his marksmanship during the war. The last bandit broke cover, sprinting toward his horse. Clayton could have shot him in the back. It would have been easy. His finger tensed on the trigger, then relaxed. He held his fire, watching the man flee down the canyon, dust billowing behind him like ghost smoke. Only when the hoofbeats faded did Clayton holster his weapon, his movements deliberate and efficient. The familiar ritual check, chamber lower hammer holster, performed thousands of times in another life. He turned to find the stagecoach passengers staring at him with a mixture of fear and gratitude. A woman clutched her child to her breast, eyes wide. An elderly man nodded his thanks, hands still trembling. Among them was a well-dressed man in his 50s clutching a leather portfolio. Unlike the others, he studied Clayton with recognition rather than awe. "My God," the man said, climbing down from the coach. "Clayton Reeves, isn't it? Samuel Hayes. We served together at Gettysburg. I was with General Chamberlain's staff." Clayton nodded cautiously, accepting the man's outstretched hand. He didn't remember Hayes, but that wasn't unusual. The war had been a blur of faces, most of which he'd tried hard to forget. "The shooting sergeant," Hayes continued, his eyes bright with recollection. 23 confirmed Confederate officers at Gettysburg alone. They said you could drop a man at 500 yards. Clayton's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago." "You saved our lives today," Hayes pressed on, oblivious to Clayton's discomfort. "I'm the county solicitor in Silver Creek now. How can I repay you?" "No need," Clayton replied, already turning away to check his horse. "Just trying to get to Silver Creek in one piece myself." "What business brings you to our little corner of Colorado?" Hayes persisted, following him. Clayton hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket to produce a worn letter. "My uncle Jeremiah Reeves passed away. I've been named as his heir." Hayes's expression changed subtly, the affability giving way to something more calculating. "Jeremiah Reeves of Jeremiah Valley. You're his heir. You knew him. Everyone knew Jeremiah, one of the first settlers in these parts. Kept to himself mostly, but respected." Hayes paused, choosing his words carefully. "And you're heading to claim his property." "Just a cabin, according to the letter. Nothing fancy." Hayes chuckled, though something in his eyes suggested concern. "My friend, your uncle's cabin sits on one of the most coveted pieces of land in the territory. You may be inheriting more trouble than you realize." The stagecoach driver called down that they needed to move on before darkness fell, and Hayes handed Clayton his card. "Come see me when you reach town. There are things about your inheritance you should know." He lowered his voice. "And watch yourself. Land disputes in these parts have a way of turning deadly." As the stagecoach rumbled away, Clayton mounted his horse, turning the encounter over in his mind. His father had rarely spoken of his brother Jeremiah, describing him only as lost to the wilderness. The inheritance had come as a surprise, a letter from a solicitor in Denver explaining that Jeremiah Reeves had left his property to his only living relative. Clayton had accepted the bequest without much thought. After 15 years of drifting from town to town, taking work as a blacksmith, bounty hunter, or whatever else kept him fed, the prospect of a permanent home held undeniable appeal, even if it was just a cabin in the mountains. Now Hayes's warning stirred unease. Clayton had seen enough of the frontier to know how little law mattered when land and resources were at stake. He'd hoped to leave violence behind, but perhaps that had been naive. The town of Silver Creek emerged from the landscape like an afterthought, a hodgepodge of wooden structures and canvas tents clinging to the hillside where a mining operation dominated the view. Men scurried like ants around the entrance to the mine, and the constant clang of machinery echoed across the valley. Wagons laden with ore rumbled down the main street while prospectors, merchants, and saloon girls navigated the muddy thoroughfare. Clayton led his horse down the main street, drawing curious glances from locals. He hadn't shaved in days, and his military bearing was impossible to disguise despite civilian clothes. Ex-soldiers recognized their own kind with a glance. Several nodded in silent acknowledgement as he passed. Outside the Occidental Hotel, a gleaming private rail car sat on a spur line emblazoned with the letters OMR, Occidental Mining and Railroad. The polished brass and rich burgundy paint stood in stark contrast to the dusty utilitarian buildings surrounding it. A cluster of well-dressed men surrounded a distinguished figure on the platform, their postures deferential. The central figure, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit radiating authority, caught Clayton's gaze across the street. Though 60 years old, the man stood straight as a ramrod with the unmistakable bearing of a military officer. Something in the man's eyes made Clayton look away, first an unusual sensation for a veteran of his experience. At the land office, a harried clerk examined Clayton's letter of inheritance, with obvious surprise, adjusting his spectacles as if the document might change under closer scrutiny. Jeremiah Reeves's property. The clerk's voice cracked. But that's... He glanced nervously toward the window where the private rail car was visible. That's part of the watershed Mr. Morrison has been acquiring. Morrison, Thomas Morrison, owns the Occidental Mining and Railroad. The clerk gestured toward the rail car. That's him over at the hotel, used to be a colonel in the Union Army. Now he practically owns this territory. The clerk lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He's been buying up all the land around Jeremiah Valley. Offered your uncle a fortune, but the old man wouldn't sell. Not for any price. Clayton took the property deed the clerk reluctantly provided, studying the rough map that accompanied it. Why was Morrison so interested in my uncle's land? The clerk shook his head. Water rights, most likely. Whoever controls the headwaters controls everything downstream. Mining operations need water, and Jeremiah's property sits at the source of the creek. He hesitated, then added, some say there's more to it, though. Your uncle kept to himself, but there were rumors. What kind of rumors? Nothing specific, just whispers about why a man would turn down the kind of money Morrison was offering. The clerk straightened the papers on his desk, visibly uncomfortable. Morrison doesn't like to be denied, Mr. Reeves. After your uncle refused to sell, there were incidents. A fire at his barn, cattle found dead. Nothing that could be traced back to Morrison, of course. And now the property is mine. For what it's worth, the clerk said, his expression doubtful. I'd be careful, Mr. Reeves. Property changes hands quickly around here, one way or another. Clayton folded the deed and tucked it inside his coat. I appreciate the warning. As he turned to leave, the clerk called after him. Mr. Reeves, there's something else you should know. Your uncle wasn't alone up there these past few years. Had some kind of arrangement with a group of women. Respectable ladies, mind you, he added hastily, but unusual circumstances. Clayton paused. What kind of arrangement? No one knows exactly. They showed up about 3 years ago and your uncle gave them sanctuary. Called themselves the Jeremiah Watch or something similar. The clerk shrugged. Caused quite a stir in town, 5 women living up there with a bachelor. But your uncle was respected enough that no one interfered. Clayton frowned. The solicitor's letters said the property was unoccupied. Perhaps they left after his passing, the clerk suggested, though his tone indicated doubt. Or perhaps the solicitor wasn't fully informed. Mountain folk keep their own counsel, Mr. Reeves. Why? By late afternoon, Clayton had left the town behind, following a narrow trail into the foothills. His uncle's letter had included rough directions to the property. Follow Raven Creek upstream until it forks, then take the western branch. The path grew steeper, the air cooler and sweeter, as pine trees replaced the scrub oak of the lower elevations. Clayton found himself relaxing for the first time in days. Away from people, away from the noise and stench of towns, he could almost forget the weight he carried. The memories pressed in regardless. His father's stern face as he read scripture by lamplight, denouncing violence in all its forms. The congregation's horrified expressions when young Clayton accidentally discharged his father's hunting rifle during Sunday service. The look of disappointment when Clayton enlisted, betraying his father's pacifist teachings. And then Gettysburg, the blood and the screams and the endless dying. The weight of the sharpshooter's rifle in his hands. The faces of men who never saw the bullet that killed them. The commendations that felt like accusations. Clayton shook his head, forcing himself back to the present. Focus on what's ahead, not behind. That had been his mantra since mustering out. One foot in front of the other, one day at a time. The trail opened into a small valley, breathtaking in its beauty. A crystal-clear stream cut through meadows dotted with wildflowers. Pines and aspens climbed the surrounding slopes, and beyond them, snow-capped peaks pierced the sky. The late afternoon light bathed everything in a golden glow that made the scene appear almost unreal. At the valley's center stood a structure that defied the term cabin. It was substantial, a two-story building of hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney surrounded by several outbuildings and a corral. A well-maintained garden stretched to one side, and an orchard of apple trees, just beginning to blossom, occupied a sheltered corner of the property. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling lazily in the still air. Clayton reined in his horse, frowning. The solicitor's letter had explicitly stated the property was unoccupied. Yet 5 horses grazed peacefully in the meadow below, and movement was visible through the windows. Someone, perhaps the women the clerk had mentioned, had clearly made themselves at home. Drawing his revolver, Clayton approached cautiously. The weight of the Colt was a familiar comfort, though one he'd hoped to leave behind. As he neared the main building, he noted the signs of loving care, fresh whitewash on the window frames, herbs drying on the porch, a rocking chair positioned to catch the last rays of the setting sun. Before he could reach the door, it swung open, revealing a striking woman with steel gray hair and piercing eyes. She held a shotgun with the casual competence of someone entirely comfortable with firearms. Her dress was practical, a split riding skirt and sturdy boots, but the quality of the fabric spoke of better days. "That's far enough, stranger," she called out. "State your business." Before Clayton could answer, 4 more women appeared behind her, each holding a weapon, each watching him with wary determination. A redhead with a Winchester rifle, a petite blonde with a Derringer, a dark-haired woman with calculating eyes and a Colt similar to his own, and finally a woman of about 35 with auburn hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. "My name is Clayton Reeves," he said evenly, not lowering his gun. "Jeremiah Reeves was my uncle. According to this deed, this property now belongs to me." The gray-haired woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition perhaps, or resignation. "Grace Maddox," she replied, not lowering her shotgun. "And we've been expecting you, Mr. Reeves, though perhaps not quite so soon." "Then you know you're trespassing on my property." The auburn-haired woman stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Grace's arm. "You're mistaken, Mr. Reeves. We have every right to be here." Her voice carried authority despite her age, a teacher's voice used to being heard and obeyed. "I'm Clarabelle Bell. This is Ruby Callahan," she indicated the redhead. "Sadie Quinn, the blonde, and Violet McCall, the dark-haired woman. We are the Jeremiah Watch, and your uncle gave us permission to stay here as long as necessary." "My uncle is dead." "Yes," Grace said, her voice softening slightly. "And before he died, he made arrangements for us. Arrangements that included preparing for your arrival." Clayton's finger tensed on the trigger. The situation felt wrong, of armed women claiming his inheritance, speaking of his uncle, as if they knew him better than his own kin. "What are you talking about?" "Your uncle knew he was dying, Mr. Reeves. He also knew you would come. And he knew that others would try to take this land from you." Clarabelle gestured toward the cabin. "Perhaps you should come inside. There's much to explain, and these hills have eyes and ears." As if summoned by her words, the distant crack of a rifle echoed through the valley, and dirt kicked up inches from Clayton's boot. "Get down," Ruby shouted, raising her rifle toward the ridgeline, where a puff of smoke betrayed the shooter's position. Clayton didn't hesitate. War had taught him when to question and when to act. He dove for cover behind a water trough as a second shot splintered wood where he'd been standing moments before. "Inside now," Clarabelle ordered, providing covering fire as Clayton scrambled toward the cabin door. The last thing he saw before tumbling into the shelter of his uncle's home was Clarabelle's face, determined, fearless, and somehow familiar, as though they'd met in another life. There was something in her eyes that spoke of shared experiences, though he was certain they'd never met. The door slammed shut behind them, plunging the cabin into relative darkness. Clayton pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard, his revolver still clutched in his hand. The interior was surprisingly refined, polished wooden floors, well-crafted furniture shelves lined with books, not the rough bachelor quarters he'd expected. "Welcome home, Mr. Reeves," Grace said dryly. "I hope you're ready for what comes next." Outside, more gunshots echoed across the pony, heralding a conflict Clayton had inherited along with his uncle's cabin, a conflict he neither understood nor wanted, but which would now define his future. "Your uncle left something for you," Clarabelle said, crossing to a heavy oak desk and retrieving an envelope sealed with wax. "He said to give it to you once the shooting started." The shooting? Clayton took the envelope. He expected this. Jeremiah expected everything. Grace said, checking the loads in her shotgun. "That's why we're all still alive." Clayton broke the seal and unfolded a single page covered in his uncle's distinctive handwriting, a script he recognized from the few letters that had arrived over the years. Letters his father had often burned without reading. "Clayton, if you're reading this, I've passed on and you've met my guardians. Trust them with your life as I have trusted them with mine and with the secret we protect. Beneath this valley lies a truth that would turn these mountains red with blood if discovered. Morrison knows it exists, but not where. He'll kill to find it, and he'll kill you to claim your land. I'm sorry to leave you this burden, but you're the only family I have left and the only man I know, with both the skill to fight and the heart to understand why we must. The women will explain everything. Listen to them, especially Clarabelle. She knows things even I don't. Remember what your father taught you about stewardship of the land, and remember what war taught you about the cost of peace." Your loving Uncle Jeremiah. Clayton looked up from the letter to find 5 pairs of eyes watching him intently. The gunfire outside had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. "What secret?" he demanded. "What truth?" Clarabelle exchanged glances with Grace, who nodded slightly. "Come with me," Clarabelle said, lighting a lantern. "It's easier to show you." She moved to the stone hearth and pressed a hidden mechanism. With a grinding sound, a section of the floor beside the fireplace sank and slid away, revealing a dark passage leading into the earth. "Your uncle wasn't just a homesteader, Mr. Reeves," Clarabelle said, her face transformed by the lantern's glow into something almost otherworldly. "He was the guardian of the valley's greatest treasure and its greatest danger." She descended into the darkness, pausing to look back at him. "Are you coming? Or would you prefer to wait for Morrison's men to return with reinforcements?" Clayton hesitated only a moment before following her into the earth, descending into a mystery that had already cost his uncle's life and would soon threaten his own. The passage was narrow but well constructed, with timber supports and crude steps cut into the stone. The air grew cooler as they descended, carrying a mineral scent that Clayton recognized from his days working the mines after the war. Water trickled somewhere in the darkness, a constant soothing sound. "How much further?" he asked, ducking to avoid a low-hanging beam. "Not far," Clarabelle replied, her voice echoing slightly. "Just around this bend." The passage opened suddenly into a vast chamber that stole Clayton's breath. The lantern light reflected off walls that glittered with unmistakable veins of gold, not sparse threads, but thick, rich seams that promised unimaginable wealth. The chamber was cathedral-like in its dimensions, the ceiling lost in shadows beyond the lantern's reach. "My God," Clayton whispered. "Not God," Clarabelle said quietly. "Just geology and luck. The richest gold vein in Colorado, possibly in the entire West. Your uncle discovered it 15 years ago while digging a root cellar." Clayton approached the nearest wall, running his fingers over the gleaming metal. Why didn't he mine it? He could have been the richest man in the territory. Because he understood what would happen if he did. Clarabelle raised the lantern higher, illuminating the chamber's ceiling, where a small waterfall trickled through the rock. This chamber sits directly beneath the headwaters of Raven Creek. The entire water table for the valley runs through here. Mining this vein would poison every drop of water for 50 miles downstream. So he kept it secret. He tried to, but secrets this big are hard to keep forever. Thomas Morrison somehow learned there was gold here, not where exactly, but enough to make him determined to acquire the land. Clayton turned slowly, taking in the vast chamber with its fortune in untouched gold. And the five of you, what's your role in this? We're the Jeremiah Watch. Each of us has lost something or someone to Morrison's greed. Your uncle brought us together, gave us purpose, taught us to protect what matters. Clarabelle's expression softened. He spoke of you often, though he hadn't seen you in years. Said you were a good man who'd seen too much darkness. She gestured back toward the passage. We should return upstairs. The others will be wondering if Morrison's men have left. As they climbed back toward the cabin, Clayton's mind raced. The gold explained Morrison's interest, but not his uncle's letter. Not the guns, not the women prepared to die, protecting a secret that wasn't theirs. There's more you're not telling me, he said as they reached the top of the passage. Clarabelle paused, her hand on the mechanism that would close the hidden door. Yes, she admitted, much more. But some truths are harder to accept than others, Mr. Reeves. Let's start with the gold and work our way to the rest. The room above was tense when they emerged. Ruby stood at the window, rifle ready, while Violet and Sadie had barricaded the door with furniture. Grace sat at the table cleaning a revolver with practiced efficiency. Morrison's men retreated, Ruby reported. For now, they'll be back with more guns come morning. Then we have until morning to decide, Grace said, looking directly at Clayton. Decide what? Whether you stand with us, Clarabelle answered, or whether you do what most men would, take the gold and run. Clayton felt the weight of their gazes measuring him against some standard he didn't understand. He thought of his uncle's letter of the trust placed in him by a man he'd barely known. He thought of his father's teachings about stewardship and his own search for redemption after the war's horrors. I'm not most men, he said quietly, and I don't run. A gunshot shattered the window, sending glass spraying across the room. Ruby dropped to the floor, blood spreading across her shoulder. They're back, Violet shouted, dousing the lamps. In the sudden darkness, Clayton felt Clarabelle's hand grip his arm. Ready or not, Mr. Reeves, she whispered, the choice has just been made for you. In the chaos of darkness, Clayton moved with the swift precision of a soldier. He dragged Ruby behind the heavy oak table as bullets splintered the doorframe. How bad? He asked, examining her wound by touch. Just a graze, Ruby hissed through clenched teeth. Damn Morrison's men, they weren't supposed to come back till morning. Sadie, see to Ruby, Clarabelle ordered. Violet graced the back positions. The women moved with practiced coordination that spoke of months, perhaps years of preparation. Clayton was impressed despite himself. Mr. Reeves, Clarabelle said, crouching beside him, second rifle above the mantel. Can you still shoot like they say you could? Clayton hesitated only a moment before reaching for the Winchester. The familiar weight brought back unwanted memories, but there was no time for hesitation. I can shoot. Good. We need to drive them back, give Ruby time to recover. East window has the best view of their approach. Outside, men's voices called to each other in the darkness. Clayton counted at least 5 distinct speakers, possibly more. He positioned himself at the designated window, rifle balanced on the sill, and waited for a target to present itself. The flash of gunfire revealed a figure moving between the boulders 30 yards from the house. Clayton squeezed the trigger, and the man fell with a cry. Another shot, another hit. The third man scrambled back toward the tree line. They're retreating, Clayton called out, scanning the darkness for movement. For now, Grace replied grimly. They'll be back at first light with Morrison himself, most likely. Sadie had finished bandaging Ruby's shoulder and was helping her to a chair. The redhead's face was pale but determined. I'll be ready by morning, she insisted. You'll rest, Clarabelle said firmly. We need everyone at full strength. She turned to Clayton. You handled yourself well, Mr. Reeves. Your uncle would be proud. Stop calling me Mr. Reeves, he said, setting the rifle aside. Clayton will do, and I want answers now, not in the morning, starting with who you all are and how you came to be living in my uncle's home. The women exchanged glances. Finally, Grace nodded. He's earned that much. Clarabelle gestured toward the table. Sit, Clayton. It's a long story and the night is young. They gathered around the oak table lamps, relit, but placed low to avoid creating targets. Sadie brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and Grace produced a bottle of whiskey to fortify it. The familiar routine of people preparing for a long night's watch reminded Clayton of the war. The quiet conversations, the subtle checking of weapons, the awareness of danger lurking just beyond the circle of light. I'll start, Grace said, her mind carrying the cultured tones of an educated Eastern woman. I was once Grace Holloway, wife of Judge William Holloway of the Colorado Territorial Court. My husband was assigned to investigate corruption in land deals involving the Occidental Mining and Railroad. She took a sip of her fortified coffee. 3 years ago, he was killed in a hunting accident. The man who supposedly mistook him for a deer was one of Morrison's foremen. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence. I'm sorry, Clayton said, recognizing the steel beneath her grief. Grace acknowledged with a nod. After William's death, I discovered his notes on Morrison's activities: fraudulent land claims, bribery of officials, diversion of water rights. When I tried to bring the evidence forward, I found every door closed. Morrison's influence was too pervasive. That's when your uncle found her, Violet continued. Her voice was precise, each word measured. I was working as a bank examiner in Denver when I noticed discrepancies in accounts connected to OMR. Large sums moving through shell companies, all leading back to Morrison. When I reported it to my superiors, I was accused of theft and dismissed. She rolled up her sleeve to reveal a brand on her forearm, the letter T burned into the flesh. Morrison's men wanted to make sure no one would believe a thief. Your uncle found me half dead on the road to Silver Creek and brought me here. My story's simpler, Ruby said, adjusting her bandaged shoulder. My family owned the Callahan Ranch 10 miles downstream. Morrison wanted our water rights. When Pa refused to sell, our cattle started dying. Stream turned orange with mining runoff. Her eyes hardened. Ma took sick from drinking the water. Died slow. When Pa threatened to sue, there was a fire. They said Pa fell asleep smoking. And you, Clayton asked Sadie, the youngest of the group. I was a nurse during the war, she said quietly. Union Army, though I treated boys from both sides. After the war, I came west with my husband. He was a doctor opening a practice in Silver Creek. Her gentle face hardened. He began documenting illnesses among miners: lung disease, mercury poisoning. When he presented his findings to Morrison, suggesting safety improvements, he disappeared. She looked down at her hands. They found his body in a mine shaft 6 months later. Accident, they said. Clayton turned to Clarabelle, who had remained silent. And you, what's your connection to all this? A shadow crossed her face. My story is complicated. Let's just say Morrison has taken enough from me that I'll spend the rest of my life making him pay. Clarabelle was the last to join us, Grace explained. She brought crucial information about Morrison's operations and connections. Without her, we'd have been dead long ago. Clayton studied the women with new understanding. Not trespassers, but refugees. Survivors seeking justice when the law had failed them. So my uncle took you in, made you his guardians. The Jeremiah Watch, Clarabelle confirmed. Your uncle believed that knowledge of the gold vein should remain secret, that the water source must be protected. He knew Morrison would never stop trying to acquire this land. So you've been, defending the property against Morrison's men. And gathering evidence, Violet added. Building a case strong enough that even Morrison's influence couldn't bury it. We were making progress, Grace said. Then your uncle fell ill. Cancer. Nothing to be done. Before he died, he told us you would come, that you would continue what he started. Clayton shook his head. I'm not sure what he expected from me. I barely knew the man. He knew you, Clarabelle said simply. He kept track of you over the years. The blacksmith shop in Wyoming. The bounty hunting in Arizona. He was proud of you, especially when he learned you'd stopped taking jobs that required killing. The revelation that his estranged uncle had followed his life so closely unsettled Clayton. Why didn't he contact me directly? He tried years ago, Grace said. Your father returned his letters unopened. The old resentment flared briefly. His father's righteousness, his refusal to forgive his brother for choosing a different path. That sounds like my father. Jeremiah respected your father's wishes until the end, Clarabelle said. But he knew someday you would come to this valley. He wanted you to have a choice about what happens next. Which is what exactly? Tomorrow Morrison will come, Ruby said bluntly. He'll have men papers, maybe even the sheriff. He'll claim this land one way or another. Unless you stop him, Clarabelle added. Unless you stand with us. Clayton ran a hand through his hair, weighing his options. He could leave tonight, abandon the property and the gold beneath it. He could try to claim the inheritance and sell to Morrison, walking away wealthy, but leaving these women to whatever fate awaited them. Or he could stay and fight for land he'd only just seen for a cause his uncle had deemed worthy of dying for. "I need to think," he said, rising from the table, "and I need air." Outside on the porch, the night was clear and cold stars scattered like diamond dust across the black sky. Clayton breathed deeply, trying to clear his head. The valley stretched before him, silver in the moonlight. Beautiful, peaceful, worth fighting for, worth killing for. He wasn't sure. The door opened behind him, and Clarabelle stepped out, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "It's a lot to take in," she said, moving to stand beside him at the railing. "That's putting it mildly." He glanced at her profile, elegant in the moonlight. "There's still something you're not telling me." She was silent for a long moment. "Yes," she finally admitted, "but it's not my secret alone to tell. Some truths require time. Time is something we don't have much of, according to your friends. They're your friends too now, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not." Clayton turned to face her fully. "Why should I trust any of you? I've known you less than a day." "Because Jeremiah trusted us. Because we've kept his secret for years and at great personal cost. Because tomorrow we'll all likely die defending this land if you walk away." She met his gaze unflinchingly. "But mostly because you know what it means to fight for something larger than yourself. You've done it before." The reference to his military service struck a nerve. "That was different. Was it you fought to preserve a union, to end slavery? Noble causes. This is no less important. One man's greed threatening an entire watershed, countless lives downstream." Clayton turned back to the valley. "I came here looking for peace, not another war." "Sometimes peace must be fought for," Clarabelle said softly. "Your uncle understood that. He believed you did too." Before Clayton could respond, the distant whistle of a train echoed through the valley. "That's the late train to Silver Creek," Clarabelle explained. "Morrison's private car. He's arriving tonight, not tomorrow. Apparently news of your arrival has accelerated his plans." She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Morrison was your commanding officer at Gettysburg." Clayton stared at her. "What? No, that's impossible. I'd remember. You were one of hundreds under his command. He was Colonel Thomas Morrison of the 20th Maine under Chamberlain." The revelation hit Clayton like a physical blow. Colonel Morrison, the officer who had selected him for sharpshooter duty, who had pinned medals to his chest while whispering, "Make every shot count, son. You're saving American lives with each rebel you drop." "God almighty," Clayton muttered. "The world is too small." "It gets smaller," Clarabelle said grimly. "Morrison recognized your name when the land transfer was registered. He knows exactly who you are and what you're capable of. That's why he's coming himself." "To what? Recruit me, kill me?" "To offer you a choice, most likely. A generous buyout. He'll appeal to your shared history, your loyalty as a soldier." Her eyes hardened. "He's very persuasive." Clayton leaned heavily on the railing. "This changes things." "Does it? Does knowing he once commanded you erase what he's done since, the lives he's destroyed, the land he's poisoned?" "No," Clayton admitted, "but it complicates matters." "Life is complicated, Clayton Reeves. The question is whether you can see through the complications to what matters." She turned to go back inside, pausing at the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough, and with it, decisions that can't be unmade." Dawn broke clear and cold over Jeremiah Valley. Clayton, who had slept little, stood at the east-facing window, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold. The irony wasn't lost on him, gold above mirroring the gold below, both beyond reach for different reasons. The women had prepared for Morrison's arrival with the efficiency of a military unit. Weapons cleaned and loaded, positions assigned, escape routes established. Clayton found himself impressed by their thoroughness. "Riders coming," Ruby called from her lookout position. Despite her injured shoulder, she had insisted on taking watch. 6 men, Morrison in front. Clayton joined her at the window. Through the glass, he could see the approaching party, 5 rough-looking men flanking a distinguished figure on a black stallion. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking Thomas Morrison. The military bearing, the silver hair, the unmistakable authority. "What's the plan?" Clayton asked Clarabelle, who stood checking the loads in her revolver. "We hear him out. We refuse his offer. We stand our ground." That's not a plan. That's a suicide pact. Grace approached holding a leather folder. We have leverage he doesn't know about. Deeds, contracts, evidence of fraud. Enough to destroy him if it reached the right people. Then why haven't you used it? Because the right people are few and far between in these parts, Violet explained. Morrison owns most officials from here to Denver. And the ones he doesn't own, he intimidates, Sadie added softly. The approaching riders had reached the clearing before the cabin. Morrison signaled his men to stay back as he rode forward alone, stopping a respectful distance from the porch. I'd like to speak with Clayton Reeves, he called out, his voice carrying the same command it had on the battlefield. Man to man, soldier to soldier. Clayton exchanged glances with Clarabelle, who nodded slightly. Wait for my signal if things go wrong, he said quietly. He stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but visibly. Colonel Morrison, it's been a long time. Recognition flashed in Morrison's eyes, followed by satisfaction. Sergeant Reeves, the legendary sharpshooter of the 20th Maine. I heard you'd inherited this property, but I scarcely believed the coincidence. No coincidence, I think. My uncle left it to me specifically. Morrison dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post with deliberate movements. Up close, he looked older than Clayton remembered, but no less imposing. His tailored suit and polished boots spoke of wealth, but his eyes remained those of a battlefield commander, calculating, assessing, seeking advantage. Your uncle was a stubborn man, Morrison said, approaching the steps. Principled, but stubborn. I respected that even as it frustrated me. He glanced at the cabin. I see his companions remain. They do. Unfortunate. This could be a simple business transaction between old comrades. Morrison reached inside his coat, producing a folded document. I've prepared an offer for the property. Generous beyond anything your uncle would have received. Enough for you to live comfortably anywhere you choose. He extended the paper. Clayton made no move to take it. Not interested in becoming a wealthy man, Sergeant. I'm not a sergeant anymore, and I've only just arrived. Seems premature to sell land I've barely seen. Morrison smiled thinly. Practical. I appreciate that. He tucked the offer back into his coat. Perhaps you'd walk with me. There are aspects of this situation you should understand before making any decisions. Clayton hesitated, then nodded, stepping down from the porch. Lead on, Colonel. They walked toward the stream, leaving both Morrison's men and the women watching anxiously from their respective positions. When they were out of earshot, Morrison spoke again, his voice taking on a confidential tone. We shared a crucible, you and I. Gettysburg, the defense of Little Round Top. Do you remember what I told you after that battle? You said I saved American lives with every Confederate I shot. And it was true. Your skills served a greater purpose, preservation of the Union. Progress at any cost. Morrison gestured toward the mountains. I'm engaged in a similar campaign now, bringing civilization to this wilderness. Railways, industry, future. At any cost, Clayton asked, thinking of the poison stream that had killed Ruby's mother. Morrison's expression hardened slightly. Progress demands sacrifice. You know that better than most. He stopped, turning to face Clayton directly. I want this land, Reeves. I need it for water rights for the railway expansion. And I suspect your uncle's lady friends have told you there's more to it than that. The gold, Clayton said flatly. Morrison nodded. So they showed you. Good. Cards on the table. Yes, the gold vein is valuable, extraordinarily so. But extracting it requires control of the watershed. He gestured toward the stream. Your uncle believed mining would poison the water. He was right with conventional methods. But you have unconventional methods. I have engineers developing new techniques, cleaner extraction, minimal contamination. Morrison's eyes gleamed with genuine enthusiasm. This isn't just about profit, Reeves. It's about progress, advancing mining technology, creating homes, building the future of the West. Clayton studied the older man, trying to reconcile this vision with the stories he'd heard. And the people who've stood in your way, Judge Holloway, Dr. Quinn, the Callahan family. Something cold flickered behind Morrison's eyes. Regrettable situations, all, but I don't expect you to take my word against theirs. He reached into his coat again, this time withdrawing a small leather case. Inside was a medal, the sharpshooter's badge Clayton had earned at Gettysburg. You left this behind when you mustered out. I kept it, thinking someday our paths might cross again. Morrison's voice grew earnest. You were the best I ever saw, Reeves, a man who understood that difficult actions sometimes serve greater purposes. He closed the case, offering it to Clayton. I'm building something important here, something that will outlast both of us. I could use a man of your particular talents. The property plus $20,000 plus a position with OMR, security consultant. Clayton took the metal case, the weight of it familiar in his palm. You're offering to hire me. I'm offering you a future, purpose, the chance to be part of something meaningful again. Morrison placed a hand on Clayton's shoulder. Those women in there, they're living in the past, nurturing grievances, standing in the way of progress. You and I were men who understand sacrifice for the greater good. The offer was tempting, more tempting than Clayton wanted to admit. $20,000 was a fortune. A position with OMR meant stability, respect. And part of him, a part he tried to bury, yearned for purpose after years of drifting. What if I refuse? He asked quietly. Morrison's expression didn't change, but his eyes cooled. Then we proceed legally. I have documents showing your uncle's property encroaches on railway land grants. The case would take years to resolve, during which time the property would be held in trust, inaccessible to you or your uncle's friends. He let the threat hang in the air. By the time the courts decided, there wouldn't be much left to claim. Those women would be gone, scattered or broken. And you would have nothing but regrets. Clayton stared out at the valley, weighing his options. The metal case felt heavy in his hand, laden with memories and possibilities. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. You know, Colonel, my father was a preacher, pacifist, believed violence was never justified. He opened the case, looking at the tarnished metal inside. He disowned me when I enlisted, said I was choosing murder over righteousness. Morrison nodded sympathetically. Many didn't understand what was at stake in the war, the necessity of hard choices. That's what I told myself at Gettysburg, that every man I killed through my rifle scope was a necessary sacrifice. Clayton snapped the case shut. I've had 15 years to think about necessary sacrifices, Colonel. To count the faces of men who never saw the bullet coming. He turned to face Morrison fully. I'll need time to consider your offer. Disappointment flashed across Morrison's face, quickly replaced by calculation. How much time? 3 days. Morrison studied him, then nodded. 3 days, but no more. Progress won't wait, Sergeant. He glanced toward the cabin, and neither will the consequences of refusal. They walked back toward the cabin in silence. At the hitching post, Morrison mounted his horse, looking down at Clayton with an expression that mingled respect with warning. 3 days, Reeves. Then I'll expect your answer. He gathered his reins. Choose wisely. Remember what side of history you fought for once before. As Morrison and his men rode away, Clayton remained on the porch, the metal case still in his hand. Clarabelle emerged from the cabin, her expression cautiously neutral. Well, did he offer to buy you along with the land? Clayton nodded. $20,000 in a job with Omar, security consultant, he called it. Enforcer is more accurate, Grace said bitterly, joining them on the porch. His personal executioner. And you told him, Clarabelle pressed. I asked for 3 days to decide. The women exchanged alarmed glances. You're actually considering his offer? Violet asked incredulously. I'm considering all options, Clayton replied, pocketing the metal case, including some you haven't mentioned. Such as, Grace demanded, such as why you're really here, what you're really protecting. He fixed Clarabelle with a steady gaze. The gold is valuable, but it's not worth dying for. Not to my uncle and not to you. There's something else, something you're still hiding from me. Clarabelle's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition that the time for half-truths had passed. You're right, she said finally. There is more, much more. She turned to Grace, who nodded reluctantly. Show him, the older woman said. All of it. Clarabelle led Clayton back into the cabin and toward the hidden passage they'd descended the previous night. But instead of taking the path to the gold chamber, she turned down a different corridor, one that descended deeper into the earth. Your uncle discovered the gold by accident, she explained as they walked. But what he found next was deliberate, the result of years of searching. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but more astonishing. At its center stood a circular stone structure like a well, but with strange markings carved into its rim. The air hummed with an energy Clayton couldn't explain, and the temperature was noticeably warmer than the surrounding caverns. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice hushed. "The real reason Morrison wants this land," Clarabelle replied. "The real reason your uncle died protecting it." She placed her hand on the stone rim. "This is the true heart of Jeremiah Valley, and it's why, 3 days from now, you'll have to make a choice that will determine not just your future, but the future of the entire West." Clayton stared at the stone structure, mesmerized by the strange symbols carved into its surface. They resembled no language he recognized, not Native American pictographs, not Spanish, not anything from the Old World. The circular well emanated a subtle warmth that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clarabelle ran her fingers along the symbols. "Your uncle called it the spring. It's a natural hot spring, but unlike any other in the West. The water contains minerals with unusual properties." "Unusual how?" "Healing properties." She looked up at him, her expression earnest. "Not magic, not miracles, but something science can't yet explain. The water accelerates, healing, reduces pain, extends life." Clayton's skepticism must have shown on his face because Clarabelle sighed and rolled up her sleeve. A jagged scar ran from her wrist to her elbow, clearly once a devastating injury. "2 years ago, Morrison's men attacked me, slashed my arm to the bone-severed tendons arteries. I should have died from blood loss or at minimum lost the arm." She flexed her fingers, demonstrating full mobility. "3 weeks drinking this water, bathing in it, and I was healed. Not just healed, restored completely." "That's impossible." "I thought so too. Your uncle spent 15 years documenting cases: Grace's arthritis, Sadie's consumption, Ruby's mother before the mine runoff poisoned her downstream. Dozens of local people with ailments that mysteriously improved when they drank from Raven Creek before it passed through Morrison's mining operations." Clayton circled the stone well, studying it from all angles. "If what you're saying is true, this would be worth more than gold," Clarabelle finished. "Properly managed, it could heal thousands. Improperly exploited, it would be accessible only to the rich and powerful. Morrison would control who lives, who suffers, who dies. And the symbols, Native American, ancient." Clarabelle's voice softened with reverence. "The Ute people knew about this spring for generations. They considered it sacred, used it only for their most grievously wounded or ill. Your uncle discovered it while following the gold vein, but he understood its true value immediately. So he built this," Clayton gestured to the stone structure, "with help from Ute elders who still remembered the old ways. They taught him how to channel the water, how to preserve its properties." Her expression darkened. "When Morrison's mining operations began polluting the creek downstream, your uncle realized what was at stake. Not just a gold mine, but something that could change the course of medicine forever." Clayton dipped his fingers into the water. It felt like liquid silk, warm but not hot, with an energy he couldn't explain. When he withdrew his hand, an old scar across his knuckles, a reminder of a bar fight years ago, seemed less prominent. "Morrison knows about this. He knows something is here. Rumors about Jeremiah's miracle water have circulated for years, but he doesn't know exactly what it is or where to find it." "And my uncle, he died of cancer, you said?" Clarabelle's expression grew sad. "The water slows illness, reduces suffering, but it's not immortality. Your uncle knew that better than anyone. He chose to use his remaining time preparing for what would come after securing the spring, organizing us, arranging for you to inherit." Clayton looked around the chamber, feeling the weight of his uncle's legacy pressing down on him. "Why me? Why not one of you?" "Because Morrison would never accept our claim to the land. A woman's property rights are tenuous at best, and we've all opposed him publicly." Clarabelle met his gaze steadily. "But you, his former soldier, a man with no known connection to his enemies, you might succeed where we would fail. Or I might sell to the highest bidder," Clayton pointed out. "He doesn't know I won't accept his offer." "Jeremiah believed you wouldn't. He said his brother raised a son who understood stewardship, even if they disagreed on many things." Her eyes searched his. Was he wrong? Before Clayton could answer, a distant rumble shook the chamber, dust sifting down from the ceiling. "What was that?" he asked, instantly alert. "Trouble," Clarabelle said grimly, already heading for the passage. "Morrison's not a patient man. I think our 3 days just ran out." They emerged from the hidden passage to find the cabin in chaos. Grace was at the window with her shotgun. Violet was hastily gathering documents into a leather satchel, and Ruby was helping Sadie pack medical supplies. Explosives at the North Ridge, Grace reported tersely. They're trying to divert the stream. How many? Clayton asked, checking his revolver. At least a dozen men, heavy equipment, wagons of mining supplies. He's not waiting for my answer, Clayton realized. He's taking the land by force. Not exactly, Violet said, handing him a paper. This just arrived by courier. A court order authorizing Morrison to begin survey work for the railway extension, signed by a judge in Denver. Clayton scanned the document. It was legal or legal enough to give Morrison cover for whatever he was planning. The colonel was making his move using the law as a weapon, just as he'd threatened. He's forcing our hand, Clarabelle said, strapping on a gun belt. If we resist, we're opposing a legal court order. If we don't, he'll find the spring within days. Clayton made a quick decision. Grace, Ruby, hold position here. Make it look like we're preparing to defend. Violet, secure those documents somewhere safe. Sadie, what's the fastest route to Silver Creek? The old mining trail, she replied. But it's treacherous. Why? I need to speak with Samuel Hayes, the county solicitor. If Morrison is using the law against us, we need legal counsel. I'll go with you, Clarabelle said firmly. The trail is easy to lose if you don't know it. Clayton nodded. We'll leave immediately. If we're not back by nightfall? We know what to do, Grace interrupted. This isn't our first siege, Mr. Reeves. 10 minutes later, Clayton and Clarabelle were mounted and moving through the dense forest that flanked the valley's eastern edge. The old mining trail was barely visible, overgrown after years of disuse, but Clarabelle navigated it with confidence. Hayes may not be trustworthy, she warned as they rode. Most officials in Silver Creek are in Morrison's pocket. Hayes served with me at Gettysburg. He offered help when I arrived. Clayton wasn't sure why he trusted the solicitor, but instinct told him Hayes might be an ally. He knows the law, and right now that's what we need. They emerged from the forest onto a ridge overlooking Silver Creek. The town was busier than when Clayton had arrived, wagons loaded with equipment moving toward the railway station, miners and laborers gathering in groups, an atmosphere of anticipation. Morrison's mobilizing, Clarabelle observed, getting ready for a major operation. They descended toward town, keeping to side streets to avoid attention. The county solicitor's office was a small building near the courthouse, its windows dark, despite the early hour. Closed, Clayton muttered, trying the door. Looking for Mr. Hayes, a voice called from across the street. An elderly man sweeping the boardwalk eyed them curiously. He left town last night, sudden-like, said he had business in Denver. Clayton and Clarabelle exchanged concerned glances. When will he return? Clayton asked. Didn't say. Left his clerk in charge, but the boy hasn't shown up today. The old man leaned on his broom. A lot of strange comings and goings lately. Morrison's men all over town, new miners arriving daily. He squinted at them. You folks from up Jeremiah Valley way. Just passing through, Clarabelle said quickly. Thank you for the information. They moved away, heading toward a small cafe where they could talk privately. Once seated in a corner booth, Clayton voiced what they both were thinking. Hayes is gone because Morrison wanted him gone. Anyone who might help us is being removed. It's his pattern, Clarabelle agreed. Isolate his targets, cut off all support, then move in for the kill. She sipped the coffee a waitress had delivered, grimacing at its bitterness. We need a new plan. First, we need information. What exactly is Morrison planning? Why move so quickly when he gave me 3 days to decide? The answer came from an unexpected source. At a nearby table, 2 railway workers were discussing the day's operations, their voices carrying in the quiet cafe. Biggest operation I've seen, one said around a mouthful of eggs. Morrison's got crews working round the clock to get that dam finished by tomorrow. Dam, his companion asked. Thought we were laying track to the new mine site. That too, but the dam's the priority, controls the watershed for the whole valley. Morrison says once it's operational, the Jeremiah property will be worthless, cut off from water completely. Then he can buy it for pennies. Clayton felt cold anger rising. Morrison wasn't just threatening their water, he was attempting to destroy the very thing that made the valley valuable. Without the stream feeding it, the spring would dry up. We need to get back, he said quietly to Clarabelle. Now. They rose to leave, but as they reached the door, Clayton noticed a familiar figure entering the telegraph office across the street, Daniel Whitfield Morrison's personal secretary. An idea formed. "Wait here," he told Clarabelle. Crossing the street quickly, the telegraph office was empty except for Whitfield and the operator who was transcribing a message. Clayton slipped inside, moving silently as only a former sharpshooter could. He caught fragments of the message as the operator read it back. "Urgent response required. Federal marshals requested. Armed resistance from squatters at Jeremiah property." Whitfield nodded satisfaction. "Send it immediately. Colonel Morrison needs those marshals here by tomorrow." "False charges," Clayton said, making both men jump. "Requesting federal intervention under false pretenses is a serious offense, Mr. Whitfield." The secretary went pale. "Reeves, what are you?" He composed himself quickly. "This is a private communication. You have no right." "I have every right to know when someone's fabricating charges against me." Clayton stepped closer, his voice dangerously soft. "Morrison gave me 3 days. It hasn't even been one." "Plans change," Whitfield said stiffly. "Colonel Morrison received information that made waiting untenable." "What information?" "That's confidential company business." Clayton moved faster than either man expected, pinning Whitfield against the wall with his forearm. "Let me be clear. I'm trying to resolve this peacefully, but I'm running out of options." "What information?" "A telegram," Whitfield gasped. "From Denver. Judge Holloway's notes have surfaced evidence of Morrison's illegal activities. The women are planning to deliver them to the territorial governor next week." Clayton released him, pieces falling into place. Grace's husband, the judge who had been investigating Morrison before his accident. His notes must have contained damning evidence. So Morrison is accelerating his timeline, seizing the property before the evidence can be presented. The colonel is merely protecting his interest. Whitfield straightened his collar indignantly. "Those women are dangerous agitators with personal vendettas." "Those agitators are witnesses to Morrison's crimes," Clayton interrupted. "And now so am I." He turned to the telegraph operator. "That message won't be sent." The man looked between Clayton and Whitfield nervously. "Sir, I'm required to—" "You're required to avoid participating in criminal conspiracy," Clayton said firmly. "I suggest you close the office for the day. Technical difficulties." The operator hesitated, then nodded, unplugging the telegraph line. Self-preservation clearly outweighed loyalty to OMR. "This won't stop anything," Whitfield warned as Clayton turned to leave. "The operation is already underway. By this time tomorrow, Jeremiah Valley will be under Morrison's control one way or another." Clayton paused at the door. "Tell the colonel I'll be returning to the property now, and remind him that I was his best sharpshooter for a reason." Outside, Clarabelle was waiting anxiously. "What happened?" "Morrison's accelerating his plans. The damn federal marshals, all of it." Clayton quickly explained what he'd learned. "The judge's notes are the key. Morrison is terrified they'll reach the governor." "They will if we can hold out long enough," Clarabelle said. "Grace has arranged a meeting for next week." "We don't have a week. We barely have a day." Clayton's mind raced through options. "We need to get back to the valley," warned the others. As they retrieved their horses, Clayton noticed increased activity at the railway station. Workers loading equipment, armed men gathering. Morrison was mobilizing his forces. "We can't take the trail back," Clarabelle said, noting the same preparations. "They'll be watching it. Then we'll go cross-country, through the high pass." Clarabelle looked doubtful. "It's dangerous. Narrow trails, sheer drops. Better than riding into an ambush." They set off, skirting the town's edge before turning toward the mountains. The path steepened quickly, their horses struggling on the rocky terrain. By midday, they had reached a narrow ridge overlooking Jeremiah Valley from the south. What they saw below stole their breath. A massive operation was underway, dozens of workers constructing a dam across Raven Creek just below the point where it entered Jeremiah's property. Wagons of equipment moved along newly cut roads. Armed men patrolled the perimeter. "My God," Clarabelle whispered. "He's throwing everything he has at this." Clayton studied the scene with a tactician's eye. The dam is the immediate threat. Once completed, it will cut off the spring's water source. "Can we reach the cabin without being seen?" "Not directly, but there's another way in." Clayton pointed to a ravine running along the valley's western edge. "If we follow that, we can approach from behind the ridge. Morrison's men are focused on the main access points." They descended carefully, leading their horses through treacherous terrain. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and twice they had to hide as patrols passed nearby. By late afternoon, they had reached the ravine, a narrow cut through the rock that would shield them from view. "Almost there," Clarabelle said, relief evident in her voice. "Another hour and—" The crack of a rifle interrupted her, the bullet kicking up dirt inches from her horse's hooves. The animal reared in panic, throwing Clarabelle before bolting down the ravine. "Ambush!" Clayton shouted, diving from his own mount and dragging Clarabelle behind a boulder as more shots rang out. "Three shooters," he assessed, peering quickly around the rock. "Ridge above us. They have the high ground." Clarabelle drew her revolver, wincing as she moved. "I think I twisted my ankle in the fall." Clayton nodded grimly. Their position was precarious, pinned down, one injured, limited ammunition, and no clear escape route. He took a deep breath, falling back on battlefield instincts. "Cover me," he said, checking his revolver. "I'm going to work around to their flank." "Too exposed," Clarabelle objected. "You'll be an easy target." "Not if you keep them busy." He met her eyes. "I've done this before." Before she could protest further, Clayton slipped away, using the ravine's shadows for cover. Clarabelle began firing strategically, not aiming to hit, but to force the ambushers to keep their heads down. Clayton moved like a ghost, climbing the steep embankment while staying hidden in brush and behind rocks. Years of hunting both animals and men had taught him patience. Wait for the right moment. Make each move count. He located the first shooter quickly, a bearded man with a Winchester rifle focused entirely on Clarabelle's position below. Clayton approached silently from behind, pressing his revolver to the man's neck. "Drop it," he whispered, quietly. The man complied, raising his hand slowly. "Morrison said you'd be trouble," he muttered. "Where are the others?" 20 yards east, behind those pines." Clayton quickly bound the man's hands with his own belt, gagging him with a bandana. One down, two to go. Moving through the underbrush, he spotted the remaining shooters positioned close together behind a fallen log, both armed with rifles. Taking them both would be challenging. He needed a distraction. The solution came in the form of a fist-sized rock. Clayton threw it far to their right, the noise drawing their attention. As they turned to investigate, he rushed them from behind. The fight was brief but violent. Clayton's war-honed reflexes gave him an edge, but these were experienced gunmen. One managed to fire his weapon, the bullet grazing Clayton's arm before he subdued them both. Breathing hard blood seeping through his shirt sleeve, Clayton bound the unconscious men and collected their weapons. They wore no identifying marks, but their quality gear suggested Morrison's employ. He returned to Clarabelle, who had maintained her defensive position despite her injury. "Are you hit?" she asked, noticing the blood on his arm. "Just a scratch. Can you walk?" She tested her weight on the injured ankle, grimacing. "If I must." "You must. We need to reach the cabin before dark." They continued on foot, moving slowly due to Clarabelle's injury. Clayton led their one remaining horse, which had returned once the shooting stopped. The ravine provided good cover, but their progress was painfully slow. "Morrison knew we'd gone to town," Clarabelle said as they walked. "Someone must have informed him. Silver Creek is his territory. We shouldn't be surprised. What will we do when we reach the cabin?" "We can't fight Morrison's entire operation." Clayton had been pondering that very question. Direct confrontation was suicide. Morrison had too many men, too many resources, but there might be another way. "The spring is what matters," he said finally. "If we can protect it, document it, get word to the right authorities." "Morrison controls the authorities," Clarabelle reminded him. "Not all of them. Not the territorial governor, not the federal government." Clayton helped her over a difficult section of terrain. "The judge's notes are our leverage. If we can hold out long enough to get them to someone who can act on them." They fell silent as voices drifted down from above, another patrol passing nearby. When the danger had passed, Clarabelle spoke again, her voice low. "There's something else you should know about the spring. Something your uncle discovered in his final months." Clayton glanced at her questioningly. "The water's properties are changing, strengthening. Your uncle believed the gold veins were somehow enhancing the mineral content, creating a combination more powerful than either element alone." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the spring isn't just a medical curiosity anymore. It's potentially a revolution in healing. Your uncle was corresponding with medical researchers in Boston, preparing to reveal his findings." Her expression grew troubled. If Morrison gains control, he won't just own a gold mine or a water source. He'll control what could be the most significant medical discovery of the century. The implications were staggering. Control of such a resource would grant power beyond wealth, power over life and death itself. As twilight descended, they finally reached the ridge behind the cabin. Clayton helped Clarabelle up the steep incline, both exhausted from the difficult journey. At the top, they paused to catch their breath and assess the situation. The cabin appeared intact, lamps glowing warmly in the windows. No sign of attack or Morrison's men. Perhaps the women had managed to maintain their defensive position. "Almost home," Clayton said, offering Clarabelle his arm for support. They had taken only a few steps when a familiar voice spoke from the shadows. "I'm disappointed, Sergeant Reeves. I thought we understood each other better." Thomas Morrison stepped into view, flanked by 4 armed men. Behind him, more figures emerged from the darkness, at least a dozen, all armed, surrounding them completely. "Colonel," Clayton acknowledged, his mind racing for options. "I gave you 3 days to consider my generous offer." Morrison's voice was calm, reasonable. "Instead, you interfere with company communications, assault my employees, and continue to consort with known agitators. Your generous offer was a sham. You never intended to wait 3 days." Morrison shrugged. "Business opportunities wait for no man, especially when certain parties are planning to deliver damaging misinformation to the governor." "Not misinformation, evidence." Clarabelle's voice was steady despite her injury. "Judge Holloway documented everything, Morrison. The bribes, the intimidation, the murders." Something dangerous flashed in Morrison's eyes. Judge Holloway was a dreamer who didn't understand progress. His death was unfortunate, but not unexpected for a man who meddled in affairs beyond his comprehension. He turned his attention back to Clayton. "I still respect your service, Sergeant, so I'll offer you one last opportunity. Walk away now. Leave the property, leave Colorado territory. Forget everything you've seen or heard. And the women will face the consequences of their actions. But I give you my word as an officer that they won't be harmed physically." It was a lie, Clayton knew. Once Morrison had what he wanted, there would be no witnesses left. The women would disappear just like others who had opposed him. "And if I refuse," Morrison sighed, "then you share their fate, a regrettable waste of a fine soldier." Clayton assessed their situation: outnumbered, outgunned, Clarabelle injured. Direct resistance meant certain death, but surrender meant abandoning everything his uncle had fought to protect. "I need to confer with my colleague," he said carefully. Morrison raised an eyebrow but nodded. Briefly. Clayton turned to Clarabelle, speaking in a low voice. "The passage beneath the cabin, does it connect to the mine workings?" Her eyes widened slightly as she understood. "Yes, through the lower chamber, but it's narrow, partially flooded. If we could reach it, could we use it to access the spring directly?" "Possibly, but we'd need to get past Morrison's men first." Clayton nodded, a plan forming. He turned back to Morrison. "I'd like to collect my belongings from the cabin before departing, as a courtesy between soldiers." Morrison studied him suspiciously. "You're surrendering the property." "I'm being practical. You have the manpower, the resources, the law on your side." Clayton kept his voice neutral. "I know when I'm outmatched." After a long moment, Morrison nodded. "Very well, my men will escort you to collect your personal items. Then you'll be conducted to the territorial border." His tone hardened. "But Ms. Bell stays with me as insurance of your good behavior." Clayton hesitated, glancing at Clarabelle. Her eyes conveyed a clear message. "Go. Do what must be done." "Agreed," Clayton said reluctantly. "I'll need no more than 10 minutes. 5, Morrison countered. "Jackson Reeves, escort Mr. Reeves to the cabin. The rest of you secure Miss Bell and prepare to move in." 2 armed men flanked Clayton, marching him down the slope toward the cabin. Behind them, he could hear Morrison giving orders, mobilizing his forces for the final takeover of Jeremiah Valley. As they approached the cabin, Clayton noted with concern that no one appeared to challenge them. Where were Grace and the others? Had they fled? Been captured. The door swung open as they approached, revealing Grace Maddox standing calmly in the entrance, shotgun visible, but not raised. "Mr. Reeves," she acknowledged, "we've been expecting you." "Ma'am," one of the escorts said gruffly, "Mr. Reeves is here to collect his things. Colonel Morrison has secured the property." Grace's expression revealed nothing. "Of course, please come in, Mr. Reeves. Your belongings are ready." The escorts exchanged glances, then nodded, following Clayton inside. The cabin's main room was dimly lit, shadows dancing in the corners. Ruby stood by the fireplace, hands visible. Sadie sat at the table, apparently sorting medical supplies. Violet was nowhere to be seen. 5 minutes, one escort reminded him. Clayton moved toward the bedroom, mind racing. He needed to create a diversion, reach the hidden passage, find a way to help Clarabelle. But with armed guards watching his every move, options were limited. As he entered the bedroom, he noticed something odd, a faint ticking sound coming from beneath the floorboards. Then he saw it, a small note on the pillow, written in Violet's precise handwriting. Mining charges set, Eastern Passage clear, 3 minutes from when you entered. Be ready. Understanding dawned. The women had prepared for this contingency. 3 minutes from when he entered, which meant less than 2 minutes now. Clayton began gathering his few possessions, deliberately watching the seconds pass. The escorts grew impatient. Hurry it up, one called. Colonel doesn't like waiting. Almost done, Clayton replied, positioning himself carefully near the wall furthest from the eastern side of the cabin. 1 minute left. He returned to the main room, nodding imperceptibly to Grace. She moved subtly away from the eastern wall, positioning herself behind one of the escorts. All set, Clayton announced, bag in hand. Lead the way. The escorts turned toward the door, and the world exploded. The eastern wall of the cabin blew inward, the concussive force throwing everyone to the floor. Smoke and debris filled the air. In the confusion, Clayton saw Grace and Ruby moving with practiced efficiency, disarming the stunned escorts. This way, Sadie called, already pulling aside the rug to reveal the entrance to the hidden passage. Quickly. Clayton scrambled toward her. Clarabelle is with Morrison. We need to... Violet's handling it. Grace interrupted, securing the escorts with their own handcuffs. She set charges at multiple locations. Morrison's operation is in chaos. As if confirming her words, more explosions sounded from the direction of the dam construction site. Shouts and gunfire erupted outside. Down, Sadie urged, already descending into the passage. We don't have much time. Clayton followed the women close behind. The hidden door swung shut just as boots thundered onto the cabin's porch. Above them, Morrison's men would find an empty cabin and no sign of where its occupants had vanished to. The passage was narrow and dark, illuminated only by Sadie's small lantern. They moved quickly, descending deep into the earth. Where are we going? Clayton asked as they reached a junction. To the spring, Grace replied. It's our only chance now. Morrison will tear the valley apart looking for us. And Clarabelle, Violet. If all went according to plan, they'll meet us there. Violet had a second set of charges planted where Morrison was holding his planning meetings. Clayton wasn't reassured. Too many things could go wrong. Morrison was a battlefield commander, adaptable and ruthless. He wouldn't be deterred by setbacks. The passage narrowed further, forcing them to wade through ankle-deep water. The air grew warmer, moister, filled with the mineral scent Clayton now associated with the spring. Almost there, Sadie encouraged as they rounded a final bend. The passage opened into the spring chamber, but it wasn't as Clayton remembered it. The stone well was glowing with an unearthly blue light, the water within it bubbling and steaming. What's happening? He asked, staring at the transformed spring. It's responding to the danger. Grace explained, her voice filled with wonder. Your uncle documented this. When threats approach, the spring's properties intensify. Ruby knelt beside the well, touching the water reverently. It's never been this active before. A noise from one of the side passages drew their attention. Clayton drew his revolver, aiming at the darkened opening. Two figures emerged, Violet supporting a limping Clarabelle. Both were covered in dust and soot, but appeared largely unharmed. It worked, Violet announced with grim satisfaction. The dam is destroyed, and Morrison's operation is in disarray. Clarabelle's eyes went immediately to Clayton, relief evident in her expression. You made it. I wasn't sure. I'm harder to kill than Morrison gives me credit for. Clayton replied, helping her to a stone bench near the spring. How bad is your ankle? Better than it should be, she admitted. The spring's proximity is already helping. Grace was securing the chamber's entrances, blocking passages with pre-positioned boulders. This will hold them off temporarily, but Morrison knows about the underground network now. It's only a matter of time. Then we need to make our stand here, Clayton decided. The spring is what matters. If we can hold it long enough for help to arrive. What help? Ruby demanded. Morrison controls everything from here to Denver. Not everything. Violet contradicted, producing a bundle of papers from inside her coat. Judge Holloway's complete notes plus evidence I've gathered over 3 years. Records of bribes, witness testimonies, maps of illegal operations. Morrison knows we have these, Clarabelle pointed out. It's why he accelerated his timeline. Yes, but he doesn't know I sent copies to 3 separate locations yesterday. Violet smiled thinly, including directly to the territorial governor via a trusted courier. By now, they should be in official hands. Hope flared briefly, but Clayton remained practical. Even if that's true, official investigation will take time. Morrison will find us long before then. As if summoned by his words, a distant rumble echoed through the passages. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Explosives, Grace identified. He's blasting his way in. Clayton looked around the chamber, assessing their defensive position. Good cover, limited access points, but ultimately a dead end. They could hold off Morrison's men for hours, perhaps a day, but eventually ammunition would run out, or the invaders would find another way in. Unless... His eyes fell on the spring, still glowing with that uncanny blue light. The spring, he said slowly. You said its properties intensify when threatened. Clarabelle nodded. Your uncle theorized it was some kind of natural defense mechanism. Could we use that? Somehow, the women exchanged glances. Use it how? Ruby asked skeptically. Before Clayton could answer, another explosion shook the chamber closer this time. Small rocks tumbled from the ceiling. Morrison's getting impatient, Grace observed grimly. We have maybe an hour before they break through. Clayton made his decision. Then we don't wait. He turned to Clarabelle. You said the spring connects to the water table for the entire valley. Is there a way to release it? Send the water through the cave system. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Flood the tunnels. Exactly. Force Morrison to retreat, buy us time. It could work, Violet said thoughtfully. The natural channels would carry the water through the entire underground network. But we'd be flooding our own escape routes too, Ruby pointed out. Not if we use the high passage, Sadie suggested. The one your uncle showed us, Clarabelle. It leads up through the ridge to the old Ute lookout point. Clarabelle nodded slowly. It's narrow, difficult, but passable. She met Clayton's gaze. The water would destroy everything down here. The gold, possibly even the spring itself. Better destroyed than in Morrison's hands, he replied. My uncle understood that. It's why he never mined the gold, why he protected the spring all these years. Another explosion much closer. Voices could be heard now echoing through the passages. We don't have much time, Grace warned. If we're going to do this, it must be now. Clayton looked around at the 5 women, each drawn into his uncle's orbit by tragedy, each fighting for something larger than themselves. They had sacrificed years to this cause while he had only days invested. Yet somehow he felt the weight of his uncle's legacy settle onto his shoulders, a mantle he hadn't sought but now accepted. Show me what to do, he said to Clarabelle. Let's finish what my uncle started. Clarabelle led Clayton to the ancient stone well at the chamber's center. Up close, the strange carvings pulsed with the same blue luminescence as the water, creating shifting patterns that seemed almost alive. The Ute believed the spring had a spirit, she explained, running her fingers along the symbols. Not a god, but a guardian presence that protected the healing waters. Your uncle wasn't superstitious, but even he admitted there was something aware about this place. Another explosion rumbled through the passages closer than before. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling. How do we release the water? Clayton asked, acutely aware of time slipping away. Clarabelle pointed to a series of carved channels at the base of the well. These normally regulate the flow, keeping it contained. According to your uncle's research, if these stones are removed in the correct sequence, the pressure will force the water through the entire cave system. Grace and Ruby were already positioning themselves at the chamber's main entrance, weapons ready. Violet was gathering the most important documents into a waterproof pouch while Sadie prepared medical supplies for their escape. The sequence, Clayton prompted. Clarabelle traced her fingers over specific symbols. Sun Eagle, Mountain River, the Ute elements of healing. She looked up at him, her expression grave. Once we start, we'll have minutes at most before the chambers begin flooding. And the spring itself, your uncle believed releasing it might destroy its special properties forever. Clayton felt the weight of the decision. destroying something precious, irreplaceable to keep it from exploitation. He thought of his uncle living beside this miracle for 15 years, studying it, protecting it, ultimately dying for it. Would he have wanted this? He asked quietly. He prepared for it, Clarabelle answered. These release mechanisms weren't natural. He added them as a last resort. He called it returning the gift to the earth rather than letting it be corrupted. That sounded like the Uncle Clayton had glimpsed through others' memories, principled, far-sighted, willing to sacrifice for what he believed in. Perhaps they weren't so different after all. They're through the first barrier, Grace called from her position. Multiple men heavily armed. Do it, Clayton decided. Show me how. Clarabelle guided his hands to the first stone, sun-shaped, warm to the touch. Press and turn clockwise. The stone moved under his fingers, grinding reluctantly until it suddenly gave way with a sharp click. Immediately, the water's glow intensified and a low humming filled the chamber. Eagle next, Clarabelle directed, placing his hand on a carved raptor. Counterclockwise. As the second stone-turned water began seeping around the base of the well, trickling along ancient channels cut into the stone floor. Gunfire, Ruby warned. They've engaged. The sharp crack of rifles echoed through the passages, followed by the deeper boom of Grace's shotgun responding. Mountain, Clarabelle urged, her voice tense. Push inward, then down. The third stone resisted, then sank with a sound like distant thunder. The trickle became a steady flow water spreading across the chamber floor. The last one has to be turned by both of us, Clarabelle said, placing her hand over Clayton's on the river symbol. Your uncle believed it required blood relation to the guardian and someone who had been healed by the spring. Together they pressed on the stone, which rotated smoothly under their combined touch. As it clicked into place, the entire well shuddered. The blue glow flared blindingly bright, then plunged into darkness. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the well erupted, a geyser of glowing water shooting toward the ceiling with tremendous force. The stone structure cracked, water bursting through newly formed fissures and pouring into the chamber with increasing speed. The high passage, Clarabelle shouted over the roar. Now! They scrambled toward a narrow opening on the chamber's far wall, already climbing as water swirled around their ankles. Grace fired one final shot before abandoning her position, the water rapidly rising. This way? Sadie called, taking the lead up a steep, natural chimney in the rock. Watch your footing, it gets narrow. The passage twisted upward through solid rock, barely wide enough for a person to navigate. They climbed desperately, the sounds of rushing water growing below them. Clayton helped the women where he could, boosting them past difficult sections, ensuring no one was left behind. Behind them, shouts of alarm echoed through the flooding chambers. Morrison's men had broken through, only to face a wall of water rushing toward them. Keep moving, Violet urged, as they reached a particularly tight squeeze. The water's rising faster than I calculated. Clayton glanced back to see glowing blue water surging up the passage behind them, already submerging the lower sections of their escape route. The spring wasn't just flooding, it was pursuing them. After what seemed like hours of desperate climbing, they emerged onto a small ledge high on the valley's eastern ridge. The night air felt shockingly cold after the humid warmth of the caverns. Gasping and exhausted, they collapsed onto the rocky ground. Everyone accounted for, Clayton asked, doing a quick head count. All present, Grace confirmed, her normally dignified appearance disheveled from the climb. Though I don't think any of us will be the same after this night. From their elevated position, they had a clear view of Jeremiah Valley spread below. In the moonlight, they could see chaos unfolding, men running from the various cave entrances as water gushed forth, equipment, abandoned horses breaking free in panic. And at the center of it all stood Thomas Morrison, his commanding figure unmistakable, even at a distance, shouting orders that went largely unheeded in the growing pandemonium. The spring is emptying itself completely. Clarabelle observed, her voice tinged with awe and sorrow. I've never seen anything like it. The water pouring from the hillside began to coalesce into a new stream, cutting a path down the valley and washing away sections of Morrison's partially constructed dam. The blue glow was visible, even from their position, illuminating the valley in an otherworldly light. Will the special properties be lost? Clayton asked. Some, perhaps most, Clarabelle admitted, but your uncle theorized that the minerals would eventually settle into the new stream bed. The healing power might be diluted, but not destroyed entirely. And the gold? Likely inaccessible now. The main chambers will remain flooded for years, perhaps decades. Clayton nodded, feeling a complex mixture of relief and regret. His inheritance, both the gold and the spring, was effectively gone. Yet he couldn't regret the choice. Morrison's plan to control and exploit the valley's resources had been thwarted, at least temporarily. Morrison won't give up, Grace warned, watching the activity below. He'll regroup, find another angle of attack. But we've bought time, Violet countered. My evidence should reach the governor within days. Once official investigation begins, investigation can be delayed, witnesses, intimidated evidence, lost, Ruby interrupted bitterly. We've all seen Morrison's influence at work. They fell silent, the reality of their situation sinking in. They had escaped immediate danger, but remained vulnerable, exposed on the mountainside, cut off from supplies with a powerful enemy below. We need to move, Clayton decided. This position is too exposed once daylight comes. Sadie, you mentioned an old Ute lookout. The young woman nodded. About half a mile along this ridge. It offers better shelter in a hidden path down to the valley floor on the far side, away from Morrison's operations. Then that's our destination. Can everyone manage? Despite exhaustion and various minor injuries, they all nodded. These were women accustomed to hardship, to persevering when others would surrender. They moved carefully along the ridge, the terrain treacherous in darkness. Clarabelle walked beside Clayton, her ankle clearly paining her despite her attempts to hide it. May I, he asked, offering his arm for support. She hesitated, then accepted, leaning on him slightly. Thank you for this and for everything today. Many men would have taken Morrison's offer. I'm not many men. No, she agreed quietly. You're very much your uncle's nephew, as it turns out. The compliment warmed him unexpectedly. I barely knew him. Yet you're honoring his legacy without hesitation. That says something about both of you. They walked in silence for a moment before Clarabelle spoke again, her voice lower. There's something I need to tell you. About your uncle. About me. I should have said it earlier, but the timing never seemed right. Clayton sensed the gravity in her tone. I'm listening. Before she could continue, Sadie called from ahead. We've reached the lookout. The Ute lookout proved to be a natural shelf in the rock face, partially enclosed by an overhanging ledge and ancient stone walls. It offered protection from both weather and observation from below. The Ute used this for centuries to watch for enemies approaching the valley, Sadie explained as they settled into the space. Your uncle maintained it, added some comforts. Indeed, the shelter contained stored supplies, blankets, dried food, water containers, even simple weapons. Clayton recognized his uncle's foresight once again. Jeremiah Reeves had prepared for multiple contingencies, including the one they now faced. We should rest while we can, Grace suggested. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. They arranged themselves in the limited space, sharing blankets against the mountain chill. Clayton took first watch, positioning himself where he could observe both the valley below and the path they had traveled. The night was clear, stars gleaming like silver above the dramatic landscape. From this vantage, he could see Morrison's men regrouping near the railway camp, torches moving as search parties formed. The blue-tinged floodwaters continued to reshape the valley floor, carving new channels and pooling in low areas. Clarabelle joined him, silently wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. You should rest, he said, not taking his eyes from the valley. Soon. She settled beside him, her presence somehow both comforting and disquieting. But first I need to finish what I started to tell you. Clayton turned to face her, noting the unusual tension in her features. What is it? She took a deep breath. Your uncle wasn't just my mentor or ally. He was my father. The revelation struck Clayton like a physical blow. But that would make you, your cousin, yes. Her eyes held his steadily. Jeremiah Reeves was my father. My mother was Eliza Bell, a schoolteacher from Denver. They never married, couldn't because of circumstances, I'll explain, but they loved each other deeply. Clayton struggled to process this information. Why keep this secret? Why not tell me immediately? Because of Morrison, she said simply. Because knowing the truth puts you in even greater danger. Explain. Clarabelle gazed out at the valley, gathering her thoughts. It begins 30 years ago when your uncle and Thomas Morrison were young men friends and business partners. They discovered gold in these mountains together, formed a mining company with equal shares. Morrison and my uncle were partners. Clayton couldn't hide his surprise. More than partners, like brothers, according to my mother. They had grand plans to build an empire together. Clarabelle's expression darkened. Then they discovered the spring and disagreed about how to use it, Clayton guessed. Exactly. Your uncle saw it as something sacred to be studied carefully and eventually shared with the medical community for the benefit of all. Morrison saw it as a source of power and wealth to be controlled and exploited. She paused. Their partnership dissolved bitterly. Your uncle bought Morrison's share of this specific property with everything he had while Morrison went on to form Occidental Mining. And where do you come into this story? My mother was Morrison's fiancée before she met your uncle. Clarabelle's voice grew quieter. When she chose Jeremiah over Morrison, something broke in him. The rejection transformed his ambition into obsession, his drive into vengeance. The pieces began falling into place. So Morrison's determination to acquire this land was never just about gold or water or even the spring's healing properties. It was about defeating his former friend, possessing what Jeremiah valued most. Clarabelle's eyes reflected the starlight. Morrison swore he would take everything Jeremiah loved, the land, the spring, and eventually me. He knows you're Jeremiah's daughter. He suspected. My mother fled Denver with me when I was an infant, changed our name from Reeves to Bell. I grew up knowing Jeremiah only as a family friend who visited occasionally. Her voice caught. It wasn't until my mother died that I learned the truth. And you came here to your father. Yes, by then Morrison's power in the territory was growing. Jeremiah feared public acknowledgement of our relationship would make me a target. She looked down at her hands. So I became part of the Jeremiah Watch instead, publicly just another woman seeking sanctuary. Clayton absorbed this revelation, understanding now why his uncle had entrusted this woman with so much responsibility, why he'd instructed Clayton specifically to trust her. There's more, Clarabelle continued. Morrison discovered my identity 3 years ago. He had me abducted, held captive in his private railcar for days. Clayton felt a surge of protective anger. Did he harm you? Not physically. He wanted to convince me to join him to turn against my father. Disgust colored her tone. He offered marriage, wealth, position, as if those things could possibly tempt me. When I refused, he promised he would destroy everything and everyone my father cared about. That's when you were injured. The scar on your arm, she nodded. I escaped barely. The spring saved my life. Her eyes met his directly. So now you understand. Morrison's obsession with this valley goes beyond resources. It's personal, pathological. And knowing I'm your cousin makes you an even greater threat in his eyes. Clayton processed this information, pieces falling into place. Morrison's intensity, the personal nature of the conflict, the decades-long grudge that had shaped the fate of the entire valley. Why tell me now? Because tomorrow we face Morrison again, and you deserve to know exactly what you're fighting for. She placed her hand on his arm. And because blood should know blood. We're family, Clayton, the last of the Reeves line. Whatever happens, I wanted you to know that. The simple declaration affected Clayton more than he expected. Family. After years of isolation, of carrying the burden of his war experiences alone, the word held unexpected power. Thank you for telling me, he said simply. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching Morrison's search parties fan out across the valley floor below, still far from their elevated position. You should rest now, Clayton finally said. I'll wake Ruby for the next watch in a few hours. Clarabelle nodded, rising to return to the shelter. At the entrance, she paused. Clayton, I'm glad you came. Whatever happens next, I'm glad we met. After she'd gone, Clayton returned his attention to the valley, thoughts churning. His simple inheritance had become a complex web of family history, old grudges, and moral obligations. Yet strangely, he felt more centered than he had in years. The aimless drifting that had characterized his post-war life had been replaced by clear purpose. For the first time since Gettysburg, Clayton Reeves knew exactly what he was fighting for. Dawn broke over Jeremiah Valley, revealing the full extent of the previous night's transformation. The floodwaters had receded somewhat, but left their mark, new streams cutting across what had been meadowland, pools of blue-tinged water collecting in low areas. Morrison's partially constructed dam washed away entirely. From their elevated position, the group watched as Morrison's operation attempted to regroup. Men gathered around a command tent near the railway spur, while others formed search parties that began methodically combing the hillsides. "They're being systematic," Grace observed, watching through a small spyglass. "Working up from the valley floor in coordinated sweeps. They'll reach this position by midday." "Then we need to be elsewhere by midday," Clayton replied. He turned to Sadie. "You mentioned a path down the far side. Where does it lead?" "Eventually to Silver Creek, but by a route few know. It follows an old Ute hunting trail through the back country. Morrison's men won't be familiar with it." Clayton considered their options. Remaining in the mountains meant eventual discovery. Morrison had too many men, too many resources. Reaching Silver Creek offered potential sanctuary, though the town was largely under Morrison's influence. "Silver Creek is our best option," he decided. "From there, we might find transportation to Denver, connect with the territorial authorities." "Assuming Violet's evidence package reached the governor," Ruby reminded them. "Either way, we can't stay here." Clayton surveyed their small group. "Is everyone fit to travel?" "It will be rough going." Despite various injuries and exhaustion, all nodded their determination. These women had survived worse conditions, faced greater challenges. They packed quickly, taking only essentials from the stored supplies. Clayton divided the remaining ammunition among them, ensuring everyone was armed. As they prepared to depart, he pulled Clarabelle aside. "Your revelations last night changed things," he said quietly. "You are not just my ally now, but family. I want your word that you'll prioritize your own safety. No heroic last stands, no sacrificial gestures." She smiled faintly. "I could ask the same of you, cousin. We Reeves seem prone to stubborn self-sacrifice." "Then let's both survive this. Deal." "Deal." She clasped his hand briefly, the gesture cementing their newfound connection. The path down the mountain's far side proved as challenging as expected, narrow, overgrown in places, skirting precipitous drops. They moved carefully, helping each other across difficult sections. By mid-morning, they had descended into dense forest that provided welcome cover from searching eyes. "We should reach Silver Creek by nightfall if we maintain this pace," Sadie informed them during a brief rest. "There's a Ute family that lives near where this trail meets the main road. They might provide shelter, perhaps horses." "Can they be trusted?" Clayton asked. "Absolutely. They've opposed Morrison for years. His mining operations poisoned their traditional hunting grounds." They continued through the forest, alert for signs of pursuit. The going was slower than hoped. Clarabelle's ankle was troubling her, despite the spring water's initial healing effects, and Grace, though stoic, was clearly struggling with the demanding terrain. By early afternoon, they reached a small stream where they paused to refill water containers and rest briefly. Clayton took the opportunity to scout ahead, climbing a nearby rise to assess their progress. What he saw chilled his blood. In the distance, a column of Morrison's men on horseback was moving along the main road towards Silver Creek, but they weren't searching. They were escorting wagons loaded with equipment and supplies. Clayton returned to the group quickly. "Morrison's moving a significant force toward town. It doesn't look like a search party, more like reinforcements." "He's fortifying Silver Creek," Violet surmised, "cutting off our potential sanctuary." "How could he know we'd head there?" Ruby asked. "He doesn't need to know specifically," Grace replied grimly. "He's simply eliminating all possible escape routes one by one." Clayton reconsidered their options. Continuing to Silver Creek now seemed dangerously predictable. Is there another settlement within reach, somewhere less obvious? The women exchanged glances. Finally, Clarabelle spoke hesitantly. "There's one possibility. It's not on any map, and Morrison may not know of its existence." "What settlement?" "It's not exactly a settlement, more a refuge." She looked to Grace, who nodded permission to continue. "Over the years, people who opposed Morrison or fled his operations gathered in a hidden valley about 15 miles east of here. Your uncle helped establish it, provided supplies and protection. Oh, a hidden community." Clayton was surprised such a thing could exist undetected. "How many people?" "Perhaps 50 at last count. Former miners, displaced farmers, a few native families. People who lost everything to Morrison's expansion." Hope stirred. 50 potential allies already opposed to Morrison in a location he was unaware of. "Can you lead us there?" "Yes, but it's not without risk. The community survives by remaining absolutely secret. Bringing outsiders, even you, breaks their primary rule." "I'm not an outsider," Clayton reminded her. "I'm Jeremiah Reeves' nephew. His blood." Clarabelle acknowledged this with a nod. Even so, they'll be cautious. Their survival depends on absolute secrecy. It's our best option, Clayton decided. Better than walking into Morrison's trap at Silver Creek. They altered course, heading east through increasingly rugged terrain. The path, barely discernible, even to experienced eyes, wound through dense forest before climbing into rocky highlands. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered and rain began to fall, rendering the trail slippery and treacherous. "We should find shelter until this passes," Grace suggested as thunder rumbled overhead. "The trail ahead crosses exposed ridgelines, dangerous and lightning." Sadie pointed to a rocky overhang nearby. "There, it's not much, but it will keep us dry." They huddled beneath the natural shelter as the storm intensified, rain coming down in blinding sheets. Lightning flash followed immediately by deafening thunder, the storm directly overhead. "This works in our favor," Violet observed. "The rain will obliterate our tracks." Clayton nodded agreement, though he was concerned about the delay. Morrison's men would be undeterred by weather, continuing their systematic search of the region. Every hour increased the risk of discovery. As they waited out the storm, he noticed Clarabelle examining a small leather-bound book. His uncle's journal, he realized. "Looking for something specific?" he asked. "Directions," she replied. "The community relocates periodically as a security measure. Your uncle recorded the current location in code." She turned the journal so he could see pages filled with what appeared to be astronomical observations and mathematical calculations. "You can decipher this." "Some of it. Your uncle taught me the basics of his system before he died." She frowned in concentration. "According to this, they should be in Hawk Valley now, about 10 miles northeast of our current position." The storm began to abate, heavy rain giving way to a steady drizzle. They prepared to move out, everyone soaked and cold despite their shelter. "We won't reach the community before nightfall," Clarabelle warned. "Traveling these mountains in darkness is suicide." "Then we find defensible shelter for the night," Clayton decided. "Resume at first light." They had covered less than a mile when Ruby, scouting ahead, returned with alarming news. "Riders approaching from the west, at least 6 moving fast despite the weather." "Morrison's men?" Clayton asked. "Most likely, too well equipped for ordinary travelers." "They found our trail," Grace said grimly. "The rain came too late." Clayton quickly assessed their surroundings. The rocky terrain offered plenty of hiding places, but few defensive positions or escape routes. Fighting was a last resort. They were outnumbered and low on ammunition. "We need to split up," he determined. "Multiple trails, multiple targets. Harder to track, harder to capture everyone." The women immediately began to protest, but Clayton raised his hand. "It's our only option. They're too close to outrun as a group." He turned to Clarabelle. "You know the location of the hidden community. Take Violet and the evidence. That's the priority, getting those documents to safety." "I won't leave you," she objected. "You're not leaving me. You're completing the mission." His tone brooked no argument. "Grace, you and Sadie head northeast. Ruby and I will create a diversion to the west, draw them away from both groups." Grace nodded, understanding. "Rendezvous at Hawk Valley, if any group doesn't arrive by noon tomorrow." "The others continue on," Clayton finished. "The evidence reaching safety is what matters." They quickly divided their remaining supplies. Clayton gave Clarabelle his uncle's medal, the one Morrison had returned to him. "Show this to the community. Proof of who you are." She took it reluctantly. "Be careful, cousin." "You too, remember our deal." He turned to Ruby. "Ready to create some trouble?" The redhead checked her rifle with grim determination. "Born ready." As the 3 groups prepared to separate, Clayton pulled Clarabelle into a brief, fierce embrace. "Family," he reminded her quietly. "Family," she echoed, voice thick with emotion. Then they were moving in different directions, Clarabelle and Violet east toward the hidden community, Grace and Sadie northeast along the ridgeline, Clayton and Ruby west toward the approaching riders. "What's the plan?" Ruby asked as they jogged through the rain-soaked landscape. "Get their attention, lead them away from the others, lose them in the canyons ahead." "And if we can't lose them," Clayton checked his revolver, "then we make sure they regret finding us." They positioned themselves on a rise overlooking the trail where they would be visible to the approaching search party. When the riders appeared, 6 men in Morrison's employ, armed and determined, Clayton fired a shot into the air, deliberately revealing their position. "There," one of the searchers shouted. "2 of them on the ridge." "Come and get us," Ruby muttered, then turned to flee with Clayton into the maze of canyons beyond. The pursuit began immediately, a riders spurring their horses up the slope. Clayton and Ruby ran not toward safety, but into carefully chosen territory, narrow ravines, where horses would struggle dense underbrush that would slow mounted men terrain they had studied while the riders had not. This way, Clayton called, leading Ruby through a narrow defile between towering rock walls. Behind them, they could hear the riders dismounting, continuing the pursuit on foot. For nearly an hour, they led their pursuers on a grueling chase through increasingly difficult terrain. The plan was working. The search party remained focused entirely on them, giving the others valuable time to escape. But the pursuers were skilled trackers, and the rain had stopped making their trail easier to follow. We need to split up too, Clayton decided as they paused for breath in a small canyon. Double their problems. Ruby nodded grimly. I'll head north toward the old copper mine. The shafts there are a maze, easy to hide, easy to lose pursuers. I'll continue west toward the river. Meet at Hawk Valley if you can. Ruby clasped his arm briefly. Jeremiah would be proud of you, Clayton Reeves. Then she was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Clayton moved in the opposite direction, deliberately leaving clear tracks for the pursuers to follow. His plan was simple: draw as many of them after him as possible, away from the others. What came after that, he would improvise. The strategy worked too well. Within minutes, he heard men crashing through the brush behind him, 4 or 5 from the sound of it, most of the search party. He increased his pace, pushing deeper into unknown territory as darkness fell. The canyon narrowed, then widened into a small clearing. Clayton paused, sensing something wrong. The pursuing sounds had stopped. Either they had lost his trail, unlikely, or they had split up to surround him. A sixth sense made him drop to the ground, just as a rifle cracked. The bullet passed through the space where his head had been a moment before. Ambush! Rolling behind a boulder, Clayton assessed his situation. At least 2 gunmen on the ridges above, others likely closing in from behind. Poor visibility in the growing darkness. Limited ammunition. No clear escape route. Reeves, a familiar voice called. Not one of the pursuers, but their leader, Thomas Morrison himself, somehow having joined the search party without Clayton's knowledge. I know you can hear me. Let's talk like civilized men. Clayton remained silent, scanning for movement, calculating angles of fire. I'm impressed truly, Morrison continued, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. You've led us on quite a chase, shown real military skill. I always said you were one of my best. A slight movement on the ridge to the left caught Clayton's eye, a gunman adjusting position. Too far for an accurate pistol shot, especially in fading light. The situation is simple, Morrison called. You're surrounded. Your companions are either captured or soon will be. There's no escape, no rescue coming. Clayton doubted the claim about his companions. Ruby was too skilled to be easily caught, and the others had a significant head start. But his own position was undeniably precarious. I'm offering you one last chance, Sergeant. Surrender now. Tell me where the women have gone and what they're carrying, and I'll spare your life. Refuse, and you die in this canyon your body never found. Morrison's voice hardened. Your uncle made his choice. Now make yours. Clayton considered his options. Surrender meant betrayal of everything he'd fought for. Resistance meant likely death, but would buy the others more time for Clarabelle to reach the hidden community, for Violet's evidence to find its way to authorities. The choice, when framed that way, was no choice at all. My uncle was right about you, Morrison, he called back, breaking his silence. You mistake wealth for worth, power for a purpose. You've spent 30 years chasing what was never yours to possess. Anger colored Morrison's response. Poetic but useless. Last chance, Reeves. Surrender or die. Clayton's response was to fire at the gunman he'd spotted, forcing the man to duck back behind cover. Immediately, multiple rifles opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around him, and, using the covering fire as distraction, Clayton slipped from his position, moving deeper into the canyon where darkness provided better concealment. The walls narrowed again, eventually opening onto a sheer drop, a dead end with a raging river 30 feet below, swollen by the recent rains. Trapped between pursuers and the precipice, Clayton weighed his final options. The river might offer escape, but the fall could be fatal, the current deadly. Turning to fight meant certain death, but might allow him to take several of Morrison's men with him. Or there was a third option, one his uncle might have chosen: disappearance. If Morrison and his men believed Clayton dead, they might abandon this pursuit to focus on the others. The sound of men approaching echoed through the canyon. Decision time. Clayton removed his coat, tearing a strip from the sleeve. He used this to bind his revolver to his belt. He would need both hands free for what came next. Then he placed his hat carefully on a rock near the edge, positioning it as if it had fallen from a struggling man. As footsteps grew closer, Clayton took a deep breath, offering a silent prayer to whatever force had guided his uncle all these years. Then he stepped off the cliff into darkness, the roar of the river rising to meet him. Morrison's men arrived seconds later, finding only an abandoned hat at the canyon's edge and no sign of their quarry in the churning waters below. He jumped, one man reported to Morrison, who stood staring at the raging river with an inscrutable expression. No body, another noted. Current probably took it. Morrison picked up Clayton's hat, examining it thoughtfully. He chose death over surrender, like his uncle. Something like respect flickered across his features. Search the riverbanks for a mile downstream. If there's no sign of him by morning, we focus on the women. As Morrison and his men departed, they remained unaware that Clayton Reeves clung desperately to a narrow ledge 10 feet below the canyon rim. His fingers bloodied from the effort, the river still raging but safely beneath him. He had not jumped but lowered himself to this precarious sanctuary, gambling everything on Morrison's assumption of his death. When the voices faded completely, Clayton began the painful process of climbing back up the sheer rock face, every muscle screaming protest. At the top, he collapsed exhausted, but alive. Morrison believed him dead. It was an advantage, perhaps his only one now. As stars appeared in the clearing sky, Clayton oriented himself toward Hawk Valley and the hidden community, where God willing the others would be gathering. He had miles to travel, injuries to overcome, and Morrison's men still hunting somewhere in the darkness. But for the first time since this began, Clayton felt something unexpected stirring within him, not just determination or duty, but hope. Hope that his uncle's legacy might yet be preserved. Hope that Morrison's long reign of corruption might finally end. Hope that the Reeves family, reduced now to himself and his newfound cousin, might still have a future in Jeremiah Valley. Gathering his remaining strength, Clayton Reeves began walking east toward that hope, leaving behind nothing but an empty hat at the edge of a precipice, a ghost story for Morrison's men to tell around future campfires. Dawn broke over the eastern mountains, pale light filtering through lingering clouds as Clayton stumbled forward. He had walked through the night, navigating by stars when visible, by instinct when the clouds obscured the sky. His hands were raw from the cliff face, his body exhausted, but determination drove him onward. According to Clarabelle's directions, Hawk Valley lay beyond the next ridge, a natural fortress of steep walls and narrow entrances, invisible from main trails and unmarked on any map. There, if fortune favored him, he would find the others in the hidden community his uncle had helped establish. As he crested the ridge, pain momentarily forgotten, Clayton gazed down upon a sight that stole his breath. Nestled within protective stone walls stood a small settlement, perhaps 20 cabins arranged in a rough circle, gardens and livestock pens, a central meeting area. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and even from this distance, he could see people moving about their morning routines. His uncle's final legacy. Not gold or healing waters, but something more precious, a community of free people surviving beyond Morrison's reach. Clayton started down the slope, then hesitated as movement caught his eye. A sentry well concealed among the rocks, rifle trained directly on him. Then another appeared, and a third materializing like ghosts from the landscape. He raised his hand slowly. "My name is Clayton Reeves," he called out. "Jeremiah Reeves was my uncle. I'm looking for Clarabelle Bell and the others." The sentries exchanged glances but maintained their positions. Finally, one spoke. "Approach slowly. Any weapons, leave them visible." Clayton complied, setting his revolver on a flat rock before continuing downward. As he reached the valley floor, more guards appeared surrounding him with wary expressions. "How did you find this place?" the lead sentry demanded. An older man, perhaps 60, with the hard eyes of someone who had seen too much conflict. "Clarabelle Bell guided me. We were separated yesterday during pursuit." Clayton looked around at the grim faces. "Have they arrived, Clarabelle, Violet, the others?" Before anyone could answer, a familiar voice called his name. Clayton turned to see Ruby pushing through the circle of guards, her face transforming from disbelief to joy. "You're alive!" she exclaimed. "We thought when you didn't return." "Morrison thinks I'm dead," Clayton explained. It seemed advantageous to let him believe it for now. Ruby's expression sobered. "Come." The others are waiting. There's much to discuss. The guards parted reluctantly, still watching Clayton with suspicion as Ruby led him into the settlement. People paused in their tasks to observe the newcomer, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Clayton noted the diversity of the community, former miners and farmers, a few Native American families, even what appeared to be a small group of Chinese workers. They've all lost something to Morrison, Ruby explained following his gaze. Land, livelihood, loved ones. Your uncle offered them sanctuary, a chance to rebuild. She led him to a larger cabin near the center of the settlement. Inside, he found the remaining members of the Jeremiah Watch gathered around a table covered with maps and documents. All looked up as he entered, expressions transforming from tension to astonishment. Clarabelle rose first, crossing the room to embrace him fiercely. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you'd find your way here." The others gathered around, relief evident in their faces. Grace gripped his shoulder with surprising strength. Sadie examined his injured hands with professional concern. Violet simply nodded, respect in her eyes. "How?" Grace asked. "Morrison's men were certain you'd gone over the cliff." "I let them think so." Clayton winced as Sadie began cleaning his wounds. "Seemed the best way to buy time." "A wise strategy," a new voice commented. Clayton turned to see an elderly man observing from a corner of the room. Tall, despite his years, with the weathered features of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors. Jeremiah would have approved. "Clayton, this is William Davis," Clarabelle introduced. "My father's oldest friend and the leader of this community." Davis approached, studying Clayton intently. "You have his eyes," he said finally. "The same look Jeremiah had when I first met him, fresh from the war with demons riding his shoulders. You fought together. Union Army 10th Cavalry, Buffalo Soldiers they called us." Davis gestured to a chair. "Sit before you fall, son. You look half dead." Clayton accepted gratefully, body finally registering the toll of the night's journey. As Sadie continued treating his injuries, he took in the maps spread across the table. "What's happening?" he asked, noting the markers placed strategically across the territory. "We're planning our next move," Violet explained all business. "Morrison is mobilizing every resource at his disposal. My contacts in Silver Creek report he's called in reinforcements from Denver, requested assistance from the county sheriff, even hired additional Pinkertons. He believes the evidence is lost with your supposed death," Grace added, "but he knows the rest of us escaped, and he won't rest until we're found." "What about your evidence package to the governor?" Clayton asked. Violet's expression darkened. "Intercepted. Morrison's influence extends further than we realized. The courier was arrested on false charges before reaching Denver." The news hit hard. Their primary strategy, exposing Morrison through official channels, had failed. "So we have nothing?" "Not nothing," Clarabelle countered. "We still have the original documents, Judge Holloway's notes, everything. We just need a new way to deliver them." "And time is running short," Davis interjected. "Morrison's men are systematically searching every valley, every canyon. It's only a matter of time before they expand their search to this area." Clayton absorbed this grim assessment. The hidden community, his uncle's sanctuary for those Morrison had wronged, now faced imminent discovery. Dozens of lives at risk, including the 5 women who had become his allies and friends. "What are our options?" he asked. "Limited," Grace admitted. "We could attempt to reach Denver ourselves, but the roads are watched. We could try sending the evidence through alternative channels, but that would take time we don't have. Or," Ruby said, her voice hard, "we could take the fight directly to Morrison." All eyes turned to her. "Explain," Davis prompted. "Tomorrow is the grand opening of the Occidental Railway extension," Ruby said. "Morrison has invited territorial officials, investors, even the governor himself to Silver Creek for the ceremony. It's his moment of triumph, proving his vision for the region's development." "A very public event," Violet mused. "With witnesses Morrison doesn't control." "Exactly," Ruby continued. "If we could present our evidence there publicly with the governor and press present, Morrison would have us arrested before we spoke 2 words," Grace objected. "Not if we had leverage," Clayton said quietly, an idea forming, "something Morrison wants badly enough to negotiate rather than attack." Clarabelle met his eyes, understanding dawning. "The spring water, samples I collected before we released the flood." Clayton nodded. "Morrison believes the spring is destroyed, its properties lost. Proof that it still exists, that we still possess its secret, might be enough to force a public reckoning." A thoughtful silence fell over the group as they considered the audacious plan. Davis broke it first. "It's dangerous, possibly suicidal." His weathered face creased in a reluctant smile. Jeremiah would have approved of that too. "It's not just dangerous for those who go," Sadie pointed out. "If you fail, Morrison will redouble his efforts to find this place. Everyone here would be at risk." Davis looked around at the community he led. "These people have been at risk since the day they defied Morrison. They deserve a chance at real freedom, not just hiding." He turned to Clayton. "But this isn't my decision alone. As Jeremiah's heir, his blood, you have a say in this too." Clayton felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. These lives, this community, his uncle's legacy, all now depended on his judgment. He thought of his father's pacifist teachings, his uncle's principled, stand his own long journey from soldier to drifter to reluctant guardian. "If we do nothing, Morrison eventually finds this place," he said slowly. "If we run, he hunts us down one by one. Fighting gives us a chance, slim though it may be." He looked at each face around the table. "I say we fight, but intelligently. Not with guns, but with truth leveraged at the perfect moment." Clarabelle nodded approval. "We'll need a detailed plan. Morrison will have security everywhere for the ceremony." "And contingencies," Violet added. "Multiple ways to ensure the evidence reaches the governor even if we're stopped." "We'll need to move quickly," Grace said, practical as always. "The ceremony is tomorrow at noon." As they began outlining strategies, Clayton felt something he hadn't experienced since the war. The focused energy of a unit preparing for battle, each person contributing their unique skills toward a common goal. But unlike Gettysburg, this was a battle he had chosen freely, for principles he believed in completely. For the first time in 15 years, Clayton Reeves felt whole. The town of Silver Creek had transformed overnight. Flags and bunting decorated the main street. A platform had been erected near the railway station, adorned with red, white, and blue streamers. Banners proclaimed the dawn of a new era and celebrated the vision of Thomas Morrison. Crowds gathered despite the early hour. Townspeople, miners, ranchers from outlying areas, all drawn by the spectacle and the promised appearance of the territorial governor. Armed guards were positioned strategically throughout town. Pinkerton detectives mingled with the crowd, and Morrison's personal security detail surveyed everything from the station platform. From his vantage point in a second-floor room of the Silver Creek Hotel, Clayton observed the scene with a tactician's eye. Everything proceeded according to Morrison's careful orchestration, a public relations triumph designed to cement his status as the region's visionary leader. Soon, if their plan succeeded, that carefully constructed image would shatter. A soft knock at the door announced Violet's arrival. "The governor's train is approaching," she reported. "Morrison has gone to meet it personally." Clayton nodded, making final adjustments to his disguise. The beard was real enough, a week's growth, but the spectacles, different clothing, and slouched posture rendered him unrecognizable to casual observers. As an additional precaution, rumors of his death had been deliberately allowed to spread through town. "The others are in position." "Yes, Clarabelle and Ruby near the platform. Grace at the telegraph office. Sadie with our insurance policy." Violet handed him a small pouch. "The spring water sample. Analysis results confirm what your uncle documented mineral content, unlike anything known to science." Clayton tucked the pouch carefully into an inner pocket. "And Davis? He and 20 men from the community are stationed around town ready to create diversions if needed." Violet checked her watch. "It's almost time." They descended to the street, moving separately through the growing crowd. Clayton positioned himself near the rear of the gathering, close to an alley that offered escape if necessary. From this distance, he could see Morrison greeting the arriving train, helping a distinguished figure in a formal suit descend to the platform, Governor Evans accompanied by aides and journalists. The ceremony began with speeches from local officials, each praising Morrison's contributions to regional development. The crowd responded with appropriate enthusiasm, though Clayton noted many farmers and small ranchers standing silent, their expressions revealing the cost of this progress. Finally, Morrison himself approached the podium, resplendent in formal attire, every inch the successful industrialist and visionary. His resonant voice carried across the square as he spoke of manifest destiny, of taming the wilderness and of bringing civilization to the frontier. "Today marks not just the completion of a railway," Morrison proclaimed, "but the beginning of a new chapter in the story of the West. a chapter where the resources of these mountains bring prosperity to all. The crowd applauded dutifully. Clayton glanced at his watch. By now, Grace should have secured the telegraph office ready to transmit their evidence to newspapers in Denver if direct presentation failed. Morrison continued his rhetoric soaring. Some call progress destructive, fear change, cling to outdated ways. But history favors the bold, those with vision to see beyond immediate comforts to the greater good of future generations. As the speech reached its crescendo, Clayton spotted Clarabelle, moving into position near the front of the crowd, Ruby close behind. He began working his way forward, maintaining his disguise while navigating through the packed spectators. And so, Morrison concluded, gesturing grandly toward the waiting locomotive bedecked with ribbons, I invite Governor Evans to join me in inaugurating the Occidental Railway extension, connecting Silver Creek to the markets of the nation. The governor stepped forward, accepting a ceremonial golden spike from Morrison. As cameras were positioned to capture the historic moment, Clarabelle made her move. Governor Evans, she called out clearly, her voice cutting through the applause. Before you honor this occasion, you should know the true cost of Morrison's progress. Heads turned. Security guards moved toward her, but hesitated at the public nature of the confrontation. Morrison's expression flickered between shock and rage as he recognized her. This woman is delusional, he announced smoothly. Security, please remove her. I am Clarabelle Reeves, she continued undeterred, her use of her true surname, causing Morrison to pale visibly. Daughter of Jeremiah Reeves, who Thomas Morrison murdered to gain control of Jeremiah Valley. The crowd murmured in confusion. Journalists leaned forward, sensing a story. The governor looked uncertainly between Morrison and Clarabelle. Outrageous slander, Morrison sputtered, composure cracking. This woman has no evidence for these wild accusations. But I do, Clarabelle countered, removing a document from her coat. Judge William Holloway's official findings from his investigation into Occidental Mining's illegal activities. Findings that were suppressed after the judge's accidental death. As Morrison signaled frantically to his security forces, Clayton moved to Clarabelle's side, discarding his disguise. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Many had heard rumors of his death at Morrison's hands. Governor Evans, Clayton addressed the official directly. I am Clayton Reeves, rightful owner of Jeremiah Valley. What you're about to hear is documented fact verified by a federal judge before his murder. Morrison's face contorted with fury. Arrest them, he ordered his men. They're dangerous fugitives interfering with a public ceremony. Before his security could respond, Davis and his men emerged from various positions in the crowd, not threatening, not armed, but strategically placed to prevent immediate intervention. Let them speak, the governor instructed, raising his hand. This is a serious accusation that deserves hearing. A politician to his core, Evans recognized the public relations disaster of silencing accusers before a crowd of witnesses and journalists. Morrison realized his predicament too late. Violence would confirm guilt. Allowing the evidence to be presented would destroy him. He chose a third option. This is a private matter, he announced, attempting to regain control. One that should be discussed away from this celebration. Perhaps in my office. So you can silence us as you silence Judge Holloway. Grace emerged from the crowd, joining Clayton and Clarabelle. So you can bury the truth about poisoned water, fraudulent land claims, and murdered homesteaders. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Local residents who had suffered under Morrison's expansion began calling out their own grievances, emboldened by the public confrontation. Morrison's expression hardened as he saw the situation slipping from his control. Governor, these people are attempting to disrupt a historic occasion with unsubstantiated claims. I suggest we proceed with the ceremony and address their concerns through proper channels. The proper channels are corrupted, Violet declared, stepping forward with a ledger book. Financial records showing bribes to officials throughout the territory, including judges and law enforcement. Clayton watched Morrison carefully as the evidence mounted, noting the calculating look replacing his initial shock. Morrison was adaptable, experienced in navigating crises. He would have contingency plans. Even if these allegations had merit, Morrison said smoothly, addressing the governor, they represent past events, regrettable, perhaps, but irrelevant to today's milestone. The railway extension brings progress regardless of how we feel about the methods. Progress at what cost? Clayton challenged. The poisoning of Raven Creek, which supplies water to ranches and farms for 50 miles downstream, the displacement of dozens of families whose land you seized through fraudulent claims, necessary sacrifices, Morrison countered, turning to the crowd. Many of you have prospered through Occidental's operations. Jobs, commerce, connection to markets all require difficult choices. Some in the crowd nodded agreement. Morrison was skilled at appealing to self-interest, at justifying moral compromises in the name of progress. Clayton recognized the moment of balance. The evidence was compelling but insufficient to overcome Morrison's influence completely. They needed the final element of their plan. You speak of sacrifices others should make, Clayton said, removing the pouch Violet had given him, while ensuring you alone reap the true rewards. He turned to the governor. Governor Evans, are you aware that Jeremiah Valley contains more than gold or water rights, that it holds something Morrison has coveted for 30 years, something he would kill to possess? Morrison's confidence faltered visibly. These are desperate fabrications. I speak of the healing spring, Clayton continued, a natural mineral water with medicinal properties beyond anything in modern science. Properties your own physicians can verify. He held up the pouch. This sample contains water from that spring. Water that Morrison attempted to control exclusively, regardless of how many died in the process. The governor's interest was clearly piqued. Medicinal water. You have proof of these properties. Documented cases spanning 15 years. Clarabelle confirmed. My father, Jeremiah Reeves, maintained meticulous records of its effects. Records Morrison attempted to destroy along with the spring itself. Morrison lunged forward suddenly, reaching for the pouch. This is absurd. There is no magical water. His uncharacteristic loss of composure told its own story. The crowd fell silent, watching the once composed businessmen unravel before their eyes. If it's absurd, Clayton said calmly, stepping back from Morrison's reach, then you won't mind if we turn these samples and research notes over to the Territorial Medical Board for independent verification. Morrison looked wildly around, sensing the turning tide. His gaze settled on the governor, a final desperate gambit forming. Governor Evans, surely you recognize this performance for what it is, a vindictive attack by people with personal grudges. I've donated generously to your campaigns, supported your initiatives. Does that count for nothing? A fatal mistake. Admitting political influence before journalists and witnesses undermined any remaining credibility. The governor, ever the politician, recognized which side now offered the better position. The territorial government takes these allegations seriously, Evans announced formally. I am postponing today's ceremony pending investigation of these claims. He gestured to his aides. Please secure those documents and water samples as evidence. Morrison's face transformed, the mask of civilization falling away completely. You can't do this, he shouted. I built this town. I own this territory. In that unguarded moment of rage, the true Thomas Morrison stood, revealed, not the visionary businessman, but the power-hungry tyrant who had terrorized the region for decades. Colonel Morrison, one of the governor's aides, said formally, please step down from the platform. We'll need to question you regarding these allegations. Morrison looked around wildly, seeing his empire crumbling before his eyes. With surprising speed for a man his age, he pushed past the governor's aides and leapt from the platform, running toward the waiting locomotive. Stop him, the governor ordered, but Morrison's personal security blocked the pursuit, creating confusion. Clayton reacted instantly, cutting through the crowd to intercept Morrison before he could escape. Years of tracking of battlefield instinct guided his movements as he closed the distance. Morrison reached the locomotive, scrambling aboard and shoving the startled engineer aside. The train began moving immediately. He meant to flee, to escape to Denver, where his influence might still protect him. Without hesitation, Clayton sprinted alongside the accelerating train, catching a handrail and pulling himself aboard the second car. The physical toll of recent days faded before the determination to finish what his uncle had started. He moved forward carefully, balancing on the narrow walkway between cars as the train gathered speed. Ahead, he could see Morrison in the engine compartment, frantically shoveling coal into the firebox to increase steam pressure. Clayton reached the engine car and paused, considering his approach. Morrison was desperate, dangerous, possibly armed. Direct confrontation risked disaster for both of them. It's over, Colonel, he called above the engine's roar. There's nowhere to run. Morrison spun, a revolver appearing in his hand. Stay back, Reeves. I won't hesitate to shoot. Like you shot my uncle. Clayton advanced slowly, hands visible. Like you ordered Judge Holloway killed. How many deaths does your progress require? As many as necessary, Morrison snarled, his composure completely abandoned. You self-righteous fool. Do you think stopping me changes anything? There will always be men like me building the future while men like you and your uncle cling to the past. My uncle wasn't against progress, Clayton countered, still advancing cautiously. He was against progress that destroys everything in its path. There's a difference. Semantics. Morrison's hand shook the revolver, wavering. The strong shape the world. The weak adapt or perish. That's the only law that matters. Clayton saw the moment Morrison, distracted by his own rhetoric, the revolver slightly lowered. He lunged forward, grasping Morrison's wrist and forcing the weapon upward. A shot discharged harmlessly into the air as they struggled for control. Despite his age, Morrison fought with desperate strength, driving Clayton back against the engine controls. The train lurched, picking up speed as they grappled. The revolver discharged again, the bullet ricocheting dangerously in the confined space. You're just like him, Morrison gasped, face contorted with decades of resentment. Jeremiah always thought he was better than me, always judging, always standing in my way. Clayton recognized the personal obsession driving Morrison, not just greed or ambition, but something deeper, more primal. A rivalry that had poisoned everything it touched. With a sudden twist, Clayton broke Morrison's grip on the revolver, sending the weapon skittering across the floor of the engine compartment. Both men dove for it, colliding painfully. As they struggled, the train entered a sharp curve, throwing them against the side of the compartment. Morrison recovered first, scrambling for the controls. I won't be taken, he shouted over the engine's roar. If I'm finished, so is everything I built. He yanked the throttle full open, disengaged the safety mechanisms. The locomotive responded with alarming acceleration, the wheels screeching against the rails as it took curves at dangerous speed. Clayton realized Morrison's final plan, deliberate derailment, a suicidal last act of defiance. He lunged for the controls, but Morrison blocked him, eyes wild with vindictive purpose. The great Thomas Morrison won't die in prison, he declared. I'll be remembered as I lived making history. The train hurtled toward a trestle bridge spanning a deep ravine, a bridge never designed for such speeds. Beyond lay a sharp curve that no locomotive could navigate at their current velocity. Clayton had seconds to act. He could jump, possibly survive, and let Morrison meet his self-determined fate. Or he could make one final attempt to prevent disaster. The decision was instantaneous. Clayton tackled Morrison away from the controls, reaching for the brake lever. Morrison fought viciously, clawing, striking his face transformed by hatred. Let go, you fool, Morrison shouted. We're both dead men. Not if I can help it. Clayton gritted, straining toward the brake with every ounce of remaining strength. His fingers closed around the lever just as the locomotive hit the trestle bridge. Metal groaned beneath them as he pulled the brake with all his might. The wheels locked, sparks flying as steel scraped against steel. Morrison, seeing his final act of destruction, slipping away, broke free and lunged for the throttle again. Clayton intercepted him, both men crashing against the side of the compartment as the train shuddered violently. The bridge swayed beneath them, timbers cracking under stress. The locomotive slowed, but not enough. The curve beyond the bridge remained unavoidable at their speed. In that moment of realization, something changed in Morrison's expression. The madness receded, replaced by a strange clarity. Perhaps he recognized the inevitability of what was coming, or perhaps some long-dormant conscience finally awoke. Jeremiah was right about one thing, he said, his voice suddenly calm above the screaming metal. You can't own a miracle. You can only be its steward. The locomotive hit the curve, tilting precariously. Clayton braced himself against the wall, reaching for Morrison instinctively. Their fingers almost touched as the world seemed to pause in perfect balance. Then physics reasserted itself. The engine derailed, breaking free from the passenger cars behind it. As it tipped over the edge of the ravine, Clayton made a desperate leap for the coupling, catching it with bloodied fingers as the locomotive plunged away beneath him. Morrison made no attempt to save himself. The last Clayton saw of Colonel Thomas Morrison was a strangely peaceful expression. As the engine fell, man finally freed from ambition's chains. The coupling held long enough for Clayton to pull himself back to the relative safety of the coal tender, which had remained partially on the tracks. Below, the locomotive exploded against the ravine floor, a fitting pyre for a man who had lived and died by his own unbending will. 3 days later, Clayton stood on the porch of a newly constructed cabin in Jeremiah Valley, watching the sun set behind the western peaks. The valley was transforming. The floodwaters had receded, leaving new streams and pools that glittered in the evening light. The damage from Morrison's operations was extensive but not irreparable. Nature, given time, would heal. Behind him, voices drifted from the cabin where the Jeremiah Watch gathered with William Davis and representatives from the hidden community. Governor Evans had proven surprisingly receptive to their evidence, perhaps sensing political advantage in exposing Morrison's corruption. Investigations had begun, indictments were being prepared against Morrison's associates, and the community's future suddenly held possibilities beyond mere survival. The door opened, and Clarabelle joined him on the porch. "The governor's representatives have agreed to our terms," she reported. "Formal recognition of land claims for everyone in the community, reparations for those Morrison displaced, and protected status for the valley's watershed. In the spring boom, we told them the truth that it's gone, its powers likely diminished forever." She smiled slightly. "We didn't mention the new spring forming in the Eastern Canyon." Clayton nodded approval. Some secrets were best kept at least until they understood more fully what they were protecting. "What will you do now?" Clarabelle asked. "The land is legally yours. You could sell, move on." Clayton considered the question, looking out over the valley that had been his uncle's life work. He thought of the hidden community emerging from shadows, of the women who had fought so long for justice, of the legacy he had inherited not just in land, but in purpose. "I think I'll stay," he said finally. "Build something here, something that honors what my uncle started." "A sanctuary." "A home," Clayton corrected. "For those who need one, for those who understand that land isn't just property, it's responsibility." Clarabelle smiled, family resemblance evident in the set of her jaw, the clarity of her eyes. Jeremiah would have liked that. From inside came the sound of laughter, Ruby recounting some tale to an appreciative audience. The simple sound of people free from fear, looking toward tomorrow with hope instead of dread. "We should join them," Clarabelle suggested. "They're planning the reconstruction. Your input would be valued." Clayton nodded but remained a moment longer, watching the last light gild the mountains his uncle had loved. The war that had haunted him for 15 years seemed distant, now its shadows receding before new purpose. "He never gave up," Clayton said quietly, "even when it seemed impossible, even when it cost him everything. He kept fighting for what mattered." "It runs in the family," Clarabelle observed, "that stubborn Reeves determination." Clayton smiled, acknowledging the truth in her words. Then he turned toward the warm light spilling from the cabin door, toward the voices of people who had become more than allies. They had become his community, his new regiment, in a different kind of battle. The battle for Jeremiah Valley was won, but the work of healing the land, of building something worthy upon it, was just beginning. That work would require the same courage, the same conviction, the same unwavering commitment his uncle had demonstrated throughout his life. As Clayton stepped through the doorway, joining the circle of planners and dreamers, he felt his uncle's presence not as a ghost, but as an inheritance of purpose, a legacy more valuable than gold or healing waters or land itself. In the end, Jeremiah Reeves had been neither a hermit protecting a secret nor a miser hoarding treasure, but a guardian keeping faith with the future. Now that mantle had passed to Clayton, to Clarabelle, to all who understood the value of what they had fought to preserve. Outside darkness settled over Jeremiah Valley, but within the cabin light and purpose burned strong, illuminating the path forward for the valley's final guardian and those who had chosen to stand with him. "There will be other Morrisons," Grace warned as Clayton joined the planning session. "Other men who see the land as something to be conquered rather than protected." "Let them come," Clayton replied, spreading the map of the valley before them. "They'll find us ready." The last sun of summer touches mountains older than empires. The stream runs clear now, carving new channels through ancient stone. And in a valley that almost died beneath the heel of progress, the whisper of healing waters rises once more, not as a commodity to be owned, but as a gift to be guarded for generations yet unborn. For some battles never truly end. Some truths must be defended anew by each generation. And some men discover their purpose, not in conquest, but in stewardship, becoming the final guardians of miracles too precious to lose.